Yeah, so I've been doing all the interviews with the headphones because when I first started this podcast, I started by just like screwing around on YouTube doing reaction videos to just get comfortable. Like, I actually just couldn't figure out what the heck I wanted to talk about, to be honest. And I had done a podcast in the past, but it was very different and it was short lived. Long story, but anyway, I got so comfortable hearing my voice, and so I kept being like, all right, that's what I'm doing. And then I started looking at it, and I'm like, other people might be uncomfortable, number one, and it kind of, I don't know, I prefer this. So this is the first interview we're doing without headphones. Monumental. Thank you for joining.
Of course.
Pleasure to have you, man. So look, I think would love to just start off by understanding your background. I got introduced to you. It was my wife actually who was like, let's see, a year ago, maybe a year and a half. Cause like my wife, she like stays up. She's very much like into, I wouldn't say politics, but is into like if you hear something on Fox News, CNN, News Nation, and they're all like slightly different, and then you can tell there's excessive spin on any of them. She's like, I gotta go find the truth, and then she'll go read like peer-reviewed articles, hear what people are saying on Twitter, and like just hear everything, and then try to find like what are the facts, because it's harder than ever to find that. And she found you.
Wow.
And she was like, this guy is so interesting and blah, 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 blah. You should really follow him because like it seems the closest to truth as we're going to get in terms of someone breaking down the facts and so on and so forth, and not like being so impassioned in one direction or the other. And then the other day she was like, see, I told you. And I think Elon Musk may have like retweeted something that you had said. And she was like, yeah, you didn't listen to me. And I was like, all right, let's see, let's reach out. So, that's how I discovered you, and you seem to have a really impressive background. Would you mind just talking through, like, where you're from? And I'll ask more questions, but where are you from?
I'm from the Bronx, New York originally, and I've been living in LA for about 10 years now.
Really?
Yeah.
When did you leave the Bronx? You went to Harvard, right?
I went to Harvard. So the
Did you
story
go to
goes,
Boston first, or?
yeah, the story goes, my parents are immigrants from Ghana.
Yeah.
So they moved here in the 80s to New York. I was born in New York, and I lived there in the Bronx until I was 10. Then we moved to a suburb in Rockland County, New York. So just a boring, like, generic suburb. And then I went to Harvard, so that brought me to Boston. Then I got a job out here, actually working in the video game industry.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm
Nice.
a huge gamer. Grew up playing all sorts of games. And,
Nice.
got really good at a game called League of Legends and started a company that produced League of Legends esports tournaments too.
That's tight.
And that was before esports was even a big thing. I didn't
Really?
expect it to really go anywhere. And it was amazing. It was like a dream job. Moved me out to California too. And I loved it here. I feel like I really came into my own as a person out in California as well.
It's called League of Legends?
Yeah, League of Legends.
And what did the company do? Or
It's called Riot Games.
Riot Games? Riot Games.
Yeah.
That's tight. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I did that for about 8 years.
Yeah.
Then in 2020, I quit my job just because I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
It was a great job, but I felt like I reached a point where I knew if I stayed, it was because I was afraid of failing at trying something by myself. So I decided, all right, well, I'm more afraid of living my life stuck than I am of failing, so I got to leave.
Yeah.
So I left, and in 2020, obviously there's quarantines and COVID and lockdown, so had a lot of time by myself, and that's when I started just to get to know myself and figure out who I am. And as a result, I realized I was really unhappy. Like, I realized that despite achieving so many cool things in my life, like I went to Harvard, and my parents, that was like their American dream.
Yeah.
Like, firstborn son goes to Harvard.
My mom too.
Yeah.
From St. Lucia. My mom's from St. Lucia. She's an immigrant. So she's like, you're going to Harvard or Yale. Full stop.
Yeah, it was that simple, right?
So you nailed that, and go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I nailed that, and then had a great career at Riot, won an Emmy, led really cool tournaments, all kinds of cool stuff. But it always felt like I was trying to fill a hole.
Yeah.
Like I was just chasing after more achievements and status, and just I never really felt at peace. And then 2020, I had a spiritual awakening. Like 2020 was, I know it was a difficult year for the world, and in some sense it was difficult for me too, but it was the most important year of my life and really changed the trajectory of everything. And fun fact, my birth name actually isn't Kaizen. My birth name is Derek.
Really?
Yeah. So had an ayahuasca experience that completely flipped my reality around. I felt actually peace and happiness without needing to achieve something, and realized that the way that I had been living my life up to that point, I was 30, was not the way that I wanted to live the remaining 50, 80 years of my life. So
what was the you said the way you were living your life before versus how you wanted to. What were the things about the way you were living your life before that you reflected on and said, that's not what I want to do anymore?
I think I was just living my life for appearances.
Yeah.
You know, like even going to Harvard, there was no real reason to go to Harvard except it was prestigious.
Yeah.
It was a gold star. It was the biggest gold star I could figure out. and I got there and I was miserable, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
It's like the thing about Harvard, if you know what you want to do and you're actually there for the pursuit of education and enlightenment, then it's an amazing place because you have some of the finest minds in the world. But I got there and I was like, wait, now what? Like, why am I even here?
Yeah.
And I felt very lost. And it's also like a pressure cooker of type A neurotic overachievers who are like trying to figure it out. And it's just like rat race upon rat race upon rat race. Yeah. And it was very valuable because it was the first experience I had of getting something I really wanted, but not actually feeling the way that I wanted.
And you got that at a young age, which is awesome.
Exactly.
Because you could figure that out early, right?
Exactly. And I wish I could say that like that one experience, it flipped everything, but it took me a while to really put the pieces together and figure out what actually makes me happy, what actually makes me fulfilled. So yeah, in 2020, I had that massive paradigm shift and changed my name to Kaizen because Kaizen means continuous evolution, essentially, or continuous change. And when I saw that word, I was reading actually a Tony Robbins book. It was Awaken the Giant Within. I didn't even finish the book. But I remember seeing that word, and it just jumped out off the page at me.
That word?
Yeah, Kaizen.
It was in a Tony Robbins book.
It was in a Tony Robbins book. And I'd heard the word in the context of business development philosophy, like constantly improving your processes.
Yeah.
But he presented it in the context of your life, like the Kaizen of your spiritual life, of your financial life, your relationships, like constantly improving everything in your life, that kind of approach to your life. And when I saw that, it felt like, oh, that's who I am. Yeah. That's my core value. I just love to grow.
Yeah.
So changed my name. Still wasn't sure what I wanted to do as a career, but just went all in on healing. And I know we talked about emotional health and how important that is. And first I was doing it for myself. And then I realized I just enjoy this idea of I can actually change myself. Like I can change my mental, emotional landscape. And that led to me getting to a point where it's like I actually felt like I healed enough but I could actually help other people do the same. Became a life coach, started my life coaching practice, did that for 3 years.
Wow.
And then this last year, it's actually really cool to hear that your wife was following me. I never know how people actually come across me because the political commentary stuff is brand new. Yeah. I mean, I was not a political person at all before that. Gotcha. I actually intentionally screened out politics and world news.
As most do,
as most people do, and completely screened it out starting in 2020 because I was like, I just need to focus on myself. And reached a point in my own development where I felt like going into 2024, I felt I want to have more impact on the world. I felt like I'd been having a lot of impact on my inner world and the inner world of my clients, but I wanted to have more impact on civilization. And I didn't know how that would happen. I actually started a podcast earlier in 2024. Yeah. Nice. It was called Conversations with Kaizen, and it was short-lived as well. It was, it was cool, and I had a studio and everything, but it wasn't quite aligned. Like I didn't know specifically what I wanted to talk about. And then we could talk about all the political stuff if you want to, but basically there was a moment in 2024 where it felt like I need to say something. This is not even like the next project. I just started pulling out my phone and start talking about all the mainstream media manipulation and lying and all the disconnection.
Let's talk about it. At some point I want to understand your background in communication a little bit because I think it's important, but since you're talking about it, what pushed you? What was like the inflection point where you're like, I gotta say something, or I gotta do, like I have to be in the room a little bit or like speak up? What pushed you to the point? Because you sound like that was the last thing that would have been on your mind, not interested in being political, but you saw something or felt something that was like, all right, that's enough. Yeah. If I'm hearing you right, what was that moment?
Yeah, actually started in 2023, October of 2023 when I went to Egypt. So I went to Egypt and...
Why?
I thought it was going to be like some spiritual pilgrimage.
cool.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like, oh, I'm going to
Yeah.
find out I'm a pharaoh in past life or something, whatever people go to Egypt for. And what actually happened is I went, I think it was the week of October 10th. So that was 3 days after the Hamas attack of October 7th. So I was in the region, and it was a huge wake-up call because I was like, whoa, like humanity's in crisis.
Yes.
Like this is a huge geopolitical crisis. We didn't even know if we would be able to get out of the region. So it was like a wake-up call, like this is reality. Like this is what's happening on Earth with humans in 3D.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that awakened a desire to just help with the species, because I felt like I understood how a lot of people's internal suffering was getting projected outward. Now, fast forward a few months, the political piece specifically started because I had started a talk show with one of my best friends. So we started doing like reaction content, basically, like observing the headlines and giving takes. And at first it was kind of general. Sometimes we talk about like the Drake-Kendrick beef.
Yeah, just whatever's topical.
Yeah, what was hot at the time.
Yeah.
And eventually we got to the point where we started paying attention to the political race because it started to heat up and it became inescapable. And there were a few things. One was when Trump got convicted of a felony. I remember everyone like celebrating, like, yeah, we got him, it's a felony. And I was like, A, I don't think most people even know what he was convicted of a felony for.
Most people still don't know.
And still don't know.
Yeah. Or understand.
B, when I actually looked at the felony, I was like, this doesn't feel like some massive ethical breach to me. I mean, he paid $130,000 to a porn star for an extramarital affair that he may or may not have had.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you might have questions about that, but felony feels like when we think felony, you think of like assault. Yeah, you think of assault. You like robbed a bank, or you really hurt someone.
Yeah.
And then I started diving deeper, and I looked at the actual case, and I thought, wow, this actually feels like it was a political hit job.
It became obvious.
Yeah, I mean, because you have to look at the specifics of the case itself. Like I looked at some of the comparables. Like, for example, one of the past Democratic presidential candidates, John Edwards, he did a very similar thing, and he was not convicted of a felony, right? And he actually literally knocked a woman up.
Got it.
And it came out during the presidential race.
Hard proof and evidence.
So, yeah, that was
biological proof.
Yeah, biological proof. There's like no escaping that. And the charges were dropped, and it also felt like there had been pretty much an 8-year campaign to catch Trump on something. Yeah. So my mental model was they've been spending millions of dollars, tremendous amount of time, tremendous amount of energy trying to pin him on something, subpoenaing tax records, and this is all they could find. Why is this being prosecuted to this degree? And then I looked at the facts of the case, like the district attorney was someone who was he was a Democrat. Yeah. He was backed by Democratic donors like George Soros.
Really?
Yeah, and it was tried in New York, very blue. So there's just so much about it that felt like it was politically biased. And then I realized, well, we like to think of our legal system as objective, but it's not. Our legal system is constituted of humans, and humans have biases.
Impossible for us to be objective,
exactly.
Generally speaking. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. You have biases, I have biases, it's impossible. Yep. So merely the choice of what crimes to try to pursue is a choice. Yeah. There can be bias in there. And normally there's enough neutrality in the system where the biases kind of work each other out. But because Trump became such a pariah, and he was for 8 years, it felt like they were just looking for anything. And then eventually they found something that felt like a technicality. So that was the first sign. The second sign was when I saw Biden on the debate stage, essentially senile. I was like, that was the first time I was like, I remember seeing TikTok videos and, you see gaffes of Biden. I was like, oh, okay, everyone has gaffes, whatever. But then I saw him on the debate stage and I was like, this guy's non-functional. This guy should step down.
Can I just tell you two things? Because I don't want to interrupt you, but I can't help it. One is, number one, with the Trump thing, I'm like, I try to be objective. I try so hard. And I look at it and I said, okay, whether you agree with him, his being or not, right? What's happening to him can happen to you.
Yes.
Like, that's the problem. Like, forget how I feel about it or how anybody, that can happen to you. And if we're setting the precedent that essentially you can be accused of felonies or things that shouldn't be a felony, if we set that precedent, like, it can happen to somebody that you are in favor of. It can happen to you. You know what I mean? Your child one day. That's, to me, like, how do we miss that problem, And then secondly, like the things you said about, I believe, the district attorney and his affiliations, it's okay. all right, but can we ignore it? We can't ignore it. Even if you disagree with that influencing, but can we ignore it? And some people want to ignore it. And that's the thing that just drives me crazy. And then with Biden, I guess it's the hypocrisy, right?
Yes.
With Biden, I'm like, all right, so I was made to feel bad every time I was like, is he okay? But now, after that debate, a week later, 2 days later, all of CNN turned on him. So now I don't know, am I crazy? Like, I was crazy to feel like something was wrong with him. And now you guys are saying there is something wrong with him. We need to get him out. Yeah. And you guys have more information than I do. What the, and that was like probably one of the most like alienating moments for me as an American, or just somebody who like trust the media in general. Like generally I trust the media, not so much anymore, but so please go ahead. You said that was one of your moments because it really threw me for one.
Yeah. I mean, and you pointed out a good point. I mean, what happened to Trump can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
Because let's go back in time. Before he announced his candidacy in 2015, he had a very positive reputation. Right, he was the apprentice guy. And he's kind of an image of the American dream. Yeah, right. Like, yes, he had help from his father, but he multiplied his wealth. He owned real estate all across New York. Right, he succeeded in one of the toughest industries, and he had a good reputation. No one was saying this stuff about him being a sexual predator. No one was saying this stuff about him just being an ethically reprehensible human being. But then he ran for president, and he started speaking out against the establishment. And people don't remember that he was not a Republican in the beginning. In fact, if you look at his history, he was a Democrat, then he was an independent, and then he registered with the Republican Party. And even then, when he originally ran for office, the Republican Party hated him. He basically took over the party. He was essentially a third-party candidate who took over the Republican Party. Yep. But the media establishment turned on him. And as a result, he became someone who was just like a persona non grata for everyone. Like, you just can't touch him with a 10-foot pole.
Correct. Wasn't he on camera saying years ago that if he were to run, he'd probably run as a Democrat? I don't know if you ever saw that. I saw that.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. And I think, once again, can we ignore that? But and tell me, if you don't mind, what was your moment with Trump where you said, all right, I'm able to see him objectively? The reason I'm asking is because I remember watching something you said. It could have been an interview. But you said, like, you were kind of like the majority of a lot of people that were like, this guy's a villain, he's crazy, he is all the things that, whatever, misogynist or whatever. And also he's insane and wants to do all these crazy things that are unconstitutional. Like, there was a lot, but then, at least for me, but then when you actually go and listen to him in long form, but you said you had a moment where you're like, all right, I feel like I've been fed something that was wrong. What was that moment, and what did you start to tune into to get a more accurate understanding of who he is and more objective?
Yeah, so after the Biden debate, I just became extremely suspicious of the Democrats.
It was that moment, huh?
Yeah, that was the first sign. I was like, wow, these people are just lying.
Okay.
These people are just straight up lying. And there's actually highlight reels of all these commentators saying Biden's sharp as a tack and he's best he's ever been. And so I was like, oh, they're just lying. So how much else have they been lying to me about? Yeah. And then I started to look at past things they said about Trump. And I said, you know what? I've never actually listened to him directly. I've just heard headlines about him consistently for 8 years. Let me actually look at some of the stuff they've reported. So I started with some of the most egregious stuff, like him saying white supremacists are very fine people. It's very simple. You don't have to look very deep. I just went on YouTube. I looked at the original speech, and I saw he not only
you listened to the whole thing.
Yeah, I actually listened to the thing, and I saw that not only did he not call them very fine people, he explicitly condemned white supremacists in that same speech twice.
I saw that. Yeah.
So then I started going through the list of things that he'd been accused of, and I found that either they were exaggerated, massively misrepresented, or just lies. Yeah. And I didn't come out with a perception that he was a saint, right? And he's someone who, yeah, he's made mistakes as a person, and he definitely puts his foot in his mouth a lot. But the image that I was being given by the media was a massive mismatch with what I actually was in receiving from him directly. Yeah. And then on top of that, it wasn't like some abrupt shift. I mean, I was still kind of wary of him. And at first I was like, all right, I don't trust the Democrats, but I'm not so sure about this Trump guy. So it's RFK for me. Yeah. And I really liked how RFK felt honest. He felt like he was in his heart. He felt like he really cared about service and had been doing that his whole life. But then the day that Trump almost got assassinated was like a huge wake up call.
Yeah.
'Cause
I'll tell you why I'm laughing later.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear it because I remember being in my kitchen and I looked at the video and I felt my heart. Like I actually felt like my chest like on fire, and I was like, "Whoa, what?" Like I never felt that strongly about a political moment.
Yeah.
And I watched the video and again I was like, I just viscerally feel something. There's something real about that moment of him saying fight, fight, fight.
Yeah.
In an environment of fakeness in politics for decades. And ironically, before Trump, everyone would have agreed all these politicians, they just lie and they say whatever they need to get elected. So there was something about the rawness of that moment that resonated in a way that I never felt about any politician before.
It's a human being up there.
Yeah.
In that moment, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, this guy's actually trying to do something here, and he's willing to take a bullet for it too. And that was when I realized, oh, I think I actually like this guy. I respect him, and I think I'm just afraid because the social cost felt so high for endorsing him. And, you know, I'm from New York, I'm black, I went to Harvard, I worked in tech, I live in LA. It's liberal the whole way through.
The whole ecosystem,
Yeah, and it's like afraid, what are my friends going to think? What's my family going to think? But eventually I realized how deep the media manipulation goes, how deep that runs in government, in the establishment government, how much they're manipulating what we hear, what we eat, what we drink, the reasons we go to wars. And I realized, this is not about Republicans versus Democrats. This is not a normal election. This is about the people versus a government that has been disserving the people for generations.
Yeah, and I think I find it so hard to understand how. Look, politics. People vote for different people. You're not going to like everybody. You're not going to agree with everybody, and not everybody's right. Either side. Just because the guy wins or the woman loses or whoever, doesn't mean you're right just because you win or lose. I think that's fine. But I think one of the last things I'll bring up is what really threw me off is once I had that moment where I actually started watching the news just to cue me to the things that I needed to unearth. Like, all right, I know half of this is lies, like actual lies.
Yeah.
Like lies, not spin, but lies. Like once I realized it, then I was like, all right, then I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here. Once I started that, that I realized that we've gone past, like, I guess my point is when you start bringing up the facts to people and you're discussing it over the dinner table with your friends or whatever, I found so much pushback on facts. I'm like, okay, I understand you don't like him. That's fine. You don't have to like him. I don't have to like him. But these here are facts. Why can't we have a discussion about these facts? Or like, why in a debate can't you like acknowledge the facts in your response? What is that? And it brings me back to the communication thing. And maybe you can shed some light on like when you're having a political debate with a friend, because that's really one of the biggest issues. It's like politics and religion, right? Why is it? Is there a term for the dynamic where you bring up a fact and then they just completely ignore the fact and like keep on going with their feelings? And the reason I bring it up is because to me it creates such a disconnect between someone you care about or someone you have a friendship. Not the fact that they disagree with you, but the fact that you can't discuss facts. What is that? Because I feel like that played a big role in like people lost friends over this election just saying like who they agree, just saying I'm staying out of it. I'm not voting. Not even voting for Trump. And then obviously if you said I'm voting for Trump, people are literally losing friendships over it. And so that's why I'm so curious of like what the heck, what do you call it when you're in facts and people won't be in facts, and why? Is it confirmation bias, or I think it's deeper than that?
I call it attachment. And no, I try to even avoid political debates because that's in the logical, very mental realm. And before anyone changes their minds, they need to feel safe in their body. So people need to feel emotionally safe before any logical change can happen. So when people hear facts, it's like, yes, in the logical mind, like facts matter, but here, everywhere below, it's like, I don't care about your facts. I don't feel safe. Right? People don't feel safe because it's literally,
that's real.
It's threatening. It's actually threatening to think I have an incorrect view of the world. So before that even happens, people need to feel safe and they need to feel like they're not going to get attacked. And when we see so much vitriol in the political environment, and we've seen that for decades, of course, everyone's going to think every political discussion is going to be a life or death struggle between you're right and wrong, as opposed to a co-exploration of what the truth is for
Yes.
everyone's benefit, which is what it should actually be.
That should be a debate.
And as you just said, like, what are the two things we're told not to talk about? Politics, religion.
Yeah.
What are the two things that have the biggest impact on your worldview and how you live your life? Politics, religion. Politics is not the thing that's happening on the screen. Politics is our shared norms and rules for how we human together.
Yep.
That's what politics is.
Yeah.
Religion is your relationship with God and yourself and reality. These are the two most important things to talk about.
Amen. That's what I was about to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Just right those are the things we should be well versed on knowing how to talk about them.
The
Right?
most.
Yeah.
And that's what the founding fathers did, by the way. They constantly had discussions about, yes, how are we to live? How do we structure a government and a country that works for the people?
Yeah.
They're constantly talking about this. If you look at like the Federalist Papers and the debates between the different founding fathers, Jefferson, Hamilton, Adams, Madison, they were constantly mixing up on this practical philosophy because they knew it was important. Somewhere along the line, we decided it's not okay to talk about this stuff. So, of course, we're not practiced at it.
Yeah.
And as a result, it feels scary to people.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like, it's just fear, man. You know, people are just scared and no one wants to think, because they think, oh, my opinion is wrong, so something wrong with me. When it's like, no, that's not what we're saying. But there's truth and there's false,
Yeah.
right? And there's something false about your beliefs. And actually, it's helpful if we all have our beliefs in order because it produces a better life for all of us. Individually, if your beliefs are wrong, you're going to suffer individually. Collectively, if our beliefs are wrong, we're going to suffer collectively. But even the idea that there's truth, it seems controversial now. It's like your truth, my truth, everything is moral relativism.
Inalienable truth.
Yeah.
Like, there might be some, right? It's okay to say that.
This might be what?
That there's truths that are just true. Like,
Yes.
just the fact that it's like, I don't even feel comfortable saying that, but I think, and I'm not saying I know what those are, but I think they exist, and like that became controversial.
Yeah. And we can get into, there's some controversial stuff depending on how edgy you want to get.
Yeah.
Can I give you an example of what's going on in the UK right now? So in the UK, it's been uncovered that tens of thousands of kids have been getting molested, like raped, for decades. And people in the government knew about it and they weren't saying anything. And the reason they weren't saying it is because these kids were being molested by Pakistani immigrants. And they didn't want to appear racist for saying this or like Islamophobic.
When was this going on?
It's been going on for decades, since I think 1993 in UK.
10,000?
Tens of thousands.
Of kids.
Multiples of 10,000.
Have been
raped.
And it's not really getting covered?
It's now getting covered.
Just now?
Yeah. And the reason it's getting covered is because Elon Musk found out about it and started speaking out about it.
What was happening? It was just being swept under the rug? People weren't getting prosecuted?
Literally, like, it was even worse than people not getting prosecuted. Fathers, when they were trying to intervene, were getting arrested.
Wow.
That's how insane it is. Because instead of dealing with the truth of, hey, molesting kids is wrong.
Yeah.
That's a truth.
That's a truth.
Period.
Yeah.
Right?
I think we can agree with that.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, but people have lost priorities. Like, no, well, we don't want to be racist because they're Pakistani and we don't. So even newspaper, they were saying Asian immigrants. No one thinks Pakistani when you say Asian.
No.
Then it became, like South Asian immigrants. Still, no, it's like, no, they're Pakistani Muslims.
Yes.
That doesn't mean all Pakistanis are doing this.
No.
It doesn't mean all Muslims are doing this.
No.
But this was like, there were rings of pedophiles doing this stuff.
Yep.
And it was just being glossed over because it's become controversial to identify certain things as wrong. And even to have moral weight assigned to certain things. Like, yes, racism is wrong.
Yeah.
And if you call out the fact that this specific ethnic minority or subsect of them is molesting children, yes, there are going to be people who cast aspersions on the entire group.
Yeah.
That is racism. That is wrong.
Yeah.
But what's the biggest wrong here? Right? Like, if that's the cost of calling this out so that children are protected,
I think that's okay.
Let's call it out.
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because the fact that it's somehow not okay, and it is okay, but somehow there are people that make you feel uncomfortable by just saying what you just said. That's why I'm laughing, because it's like something that tragic. I just have to laugh at it. Yeah. Now, what So what's happening now with that? Any idea? Is it now starting to get in the news?
Oh,
And
man.
people, do you know if they're starting to prosecute some of these people? Or
So that's one of the most disturbing things about it is that a lot of the politicians, they seem more fixated on the fact that Elon Musk is intervening, they call it influencing their elections, than the fact that he's calling out something that they should have addressed in the first place. So, for example, the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and in fairness to him, he's only been in office since July, so it's not like he's presided over this whole thing. And it's not like a one-party thing. It's like both sides, like liberals and conservatives in the establishment, this cowards, cowardly politicians who are unwilling to have the moral courage and clarity to take a stand. They've been just glossing over it. But a lot of you are like complaining about, oh, Elon Musk is interfering in our elections and he has too much influence. And I was like,
I mean, because he's telling the truth.
Yeah, because he's telling the truth. Right? Like, let's not act like this is the first billionaire to influence politics, first of all. Okay? Like,
if we're talking about it.
Yeah, like, we know there's billionaires influencing politics. At least I can see the influence that this guy's having, and I think it's a markedly positive influence. Because, again, it had been going on for decades.
And he's transparent.
We can see it right now on X. So, yeah, what's going on right now, it's like now there's mounting political pressure to actually do something. And but
you're saying cops are getting in trouble for prosecuting them or something like that? What was going on?
Yeah. So, and I know this sounds crazy, but to sort of like step this out logically, imagine you're a politician, and you have cancel culture in your country, and you don't want, especially if you're like some white politician, you don't want to be seen as being racist.
Okay.
Even though you guys have had like these mass migration and multicultural policies in the UK, which we kind of experienced here too, like open borders, but it's been arguably even worse over there.
Okay.
But you don't want to say that because you don't want to appear divisive.
Of course.
So some of these groups, like, there's nothing wrong with people from other countries, but if they're coming in and not being assimilated and they're not being vetted to make sure they're compatible with the culture, it creates problems. But you want to avoid it because you don't want to stir the pot. You want to get reelected. So then, someone, say, below you comes to you and, like, maybe it's your chief of police, says, hey, this kind of stuff is happening. You're not going to tell them to raise create a fuss about it. You're going to tell them, all right, well, let's devote our resources elsewhere. Just misdirect. And then, then fathers, like angry fathers who are going to go like defend their daughters are trying to intervene. It's like, no, you can't do that. It's vigilante justice. You can't get violent. You can't intervene. So all down the chain, there's just like a collapse of responsibility.
Wait a minute. They were, and last thing to your knowledge, right? Because I know we don't know everything, but all the details, but were they the kids that are getting raped? I assume they were other Pakistani kids, which is horrible.
Oh, no.
But they were actually British citizens?
Yeah.
Their kids are getting raped?
Yeah.
And then they weren't allowed to do anything about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This is life.
That's what we're at.
Oh, my God. And I knew like some things like that were going on over there. And once again, why I try to influence everybody to don't just read the news here, read it around the world, because a lot of that is coming here. And it's indicative of like what the future holds. And even like COVID, we moved here in 2020, I think around when you moved here. Oh, no, you were here before that. But we moved here because my wife, I'll give her so much credit. She was reading like the studies from Europe, right? What's going on there. And she's like, I think this is coming. And if I'm reading this right, this is going to last for 2 years. And so I was like, all right, we're moving. But it's because what happens in Denmark, what happens in France, what happens in the UK, we can't ignore it, especially Western countries, because we're so similar, and that it's coming here. Do you see anything like that in the U.S. happening right now?
In terms of what movements happening here?
Yeah, because the way I'm seeing what you're explaining in the UK is it's almost like things that are okay culturally in other countries have now made it to countries where it's not okay. It's actually against the law.
Yeah.
But there's so much energy in protecting people that they're not getting prosecuted for the same violations that local citizens get prosecuted for. Is that how you would describe what's going on, or what is it? Like,
so I would just.
What's the dynamic that lets us let little kids get raped?
Yeah,
in a country where it's clearly illegal. It's
cowardice. It's cowardice and bad incentives. I mean, if you look at it, even in this last election, as you said, the facts didn't really matter to people, right? Because there was such a high social cost to even saying anything remotely positive about Trump, because he's been given all these labels, racist, misogynist, that even if he says something that's like, hey, yeah, we should probably secure our border.
Yeah.
Right? We probably should get gangs out of the U.S. who are here. We probably do need to do things to bring the manufacturing base back to America.
Yeah.
It's like, well, are you saying you support misogyny? And what about this one thing he said? And what about this headline? And look at this thing he said about immigrants. And it's like, he didn't actually say that, but, you know, headline. And people don't even know where they got their belief from because they haven't been expecting what's underneath the headline.
Yep.
And in fairness to the average person, it's hard. It used to be much harder because, as you said, we would just trust the media because where else would you go for information?
Yeah.
Now, because we have social media and we have X, and AI is actually a bit really revolutionary for me.
Yeah.
Because you can use AI to sort through all these headlines and 1,000-page bills and actually get facts.
Yeah.
Now we can actually counter what we've been hearing, like these broad narratives, with actual facts.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the absence of that, politicians, they respond to the culture. Right. So if the culture is the most egregious thing that could ever happen is you get canceled because you're called a misogynist racist, do anything to avoid that. So you don't actually deal with the actual issues because people are not paying attention to the actual issues. They're paying attention to the characterizations.
Because the consequences for being accused and being as a misogynist or whatever, a racist, those consequences seem greater to you than actually prosecuting the issue.
Exactly.
And that's when we have a problem.
Exactly. So look at what happened here, right? With like mass immigration across our open border. People kept saying he's like anti-Mexican or whatever. It's like, no, he's not anti-Mexican. Yeah. He's anti people coming into the country without us knowing who they are. And those people, they're probably not the best and the brightest from these other countries too. And that's fair to say.
Some of them may be, most of them probably not.
Yeah, right.
It's okay. But immigration typically is about bringing in people in a certain way, generally speaking, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And we can have compassion for people in other countries who just want to have a better life, right? Like this is a melting pot. This is a country that is built and amplified by immigrants. That's awesome, but there needs to be an orderly way for them to come into the country.
And I don't understand why more people, I want to ask you about this because your parents immigrated too.
Yeah.
And so did my mom. But I just don't understand why there's not more, because there's so many intellectual, like really intelligent people, like you said, that go to a lot of Ivy League schools that are considered liberal, right? That's the term people would use for them. And but like, why aren't they kicking and screaming? Like, why aren't we spreading the message that we should kick and scream about putting all our resources, energy, AI, all our intelligence behind refixing, making the immigration system what it should be? Yeah. And I think America should have the best one in the world, the best system in the world, because why not? We have the best of everything else, generally speaking, or we're used to. Why not just say, hey, we need to make this work, right? Because there's so much great talent out there, so much great intellect out there that we want in our country. Let's just make it work the right way. And let's fight over what that is, not fight over whether the border should be open or not. And the reason I bring this up is because my mom's an immigrant. She's from St. Lucia, third world country. And she moved here and I remember her being so proud to like, I think she had to know the Bill of Rights maybe, or like the Constitution, or there was like certain things. She had to know U.S. history, who the presidents were and all this stuff. And she had to just understand the crux, the very basics of being an American, what that is, where we come from, and so on and so forth. Just a little bit, right? Especially from a legal standpoint. But the point, and along that process, she was saying, I respect and love my St. Lucian culture, as I do, but I'm here to be an American.
Yes.
And I think there's something very special about that, because along with being an American comes a certain moral code. What is okay to do and what is not okay to do. For instance, it's not okay to rape children. It's just not. It's not. We prosecute that, you go to jail, and that's one of the worst crimes. There's just certain things that are just not okay, right? Having 38 wives, whether you agree with it or not, in America, that's just not something we do, right? The pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, all these things, being entrepreneurial, the American dream, moving up, wanting to assimilate and create jobs and so on and so forth. That there's just so much, there's so much more that I'm missing that goes along with being an American. And I think what I loved about it is then her brother came, and then sister, and so many more of her family. But they came here to be like, I'm going to be an American. I'm also going to represent my culture. Cool. Now I feel like there's a transition where that still happens, but there is also, and I'm assuming your parents are somewhat similar. I'm not trying to describe some stuff I don't know. I haven't asked you about your parents, but now it seems like there's a lot of people who come into the country, love them to death, but it's like, no, I don't want to learn the language. Yeah. I don't want to assimilate to the culture at all. And I want to live in a little area where it's basically a microcosm of where I'm from, whether they're from any country, Philippines, Japan, the Middle East, Iraq, what do you call it, Pakistan, what else, Russia, like wherever they're from, Africa. Like my point is there's more and more contingents of people from all countries that are just like, we're staying where we're at. Like, this is our community, and we want as many people as possible from our country in this community, and we want it to slowly become like a small Argentina or wherever they're from, right? And I think there's a problem with that, right? And I think it's not a problem for them. It's not a problem for me, right? But I think culturally, if you extrapolate that over the next 10 to 15 years, we're a country, good country, but it doesn't, I'm nervous that it's not going to be America anymore, right? So that's me. Maybe I'm too nervous about it. Maybe I'm xenophobic or whatever. I don't think I'm any of those things. But my point is, I'm having a hard time articulating my fear around that because I just know there's something not right about that. What's your response to that?
Well, first, that was a very racist thing for you to say.
Yeah, right? No, I know. But it's like, I don't even know how to talk about it, but I'm just like, we're here to be Americans. Like, I'm not going to go to Paris and be like, I'm going to create an American community and stop following the laws.
Yeah.
And even though I can speak the language, I'm never going to speak it. And I'm not going to do that because it's disrespectful, right? Or I'll just stay at home or go to another country. So sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying this. And I made the joke that's racist, but people label that even this very sober analysis of culture as racist. And it's like, no, we're not talking about race. We're talking about culture.
Yeah.
Right? And culture is software that determines how the people within that culture collaborate with one another. If we have incompatible software, if we have people coming here
That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, if they don't even speak the same language, if they're not aligned with American values, if they didn't take a test to get in here, how well is that going to merge with the existing culture? It's not going to merge well. And we see it happening in Europe, for example. Like pretty soon, if they continue this like mass migration multiculturalism policy, there's not going to be France. Right? It's just going to be a bunch of different cultures in a place that we call France, but there's not going to be French people in France.
Yeah.
Italy's not going to be Italian anymore. Germany's not going to be German anymore. England's not going to be English anymore. Now, the difference between those states and ours is those are ethno-states. And by that I mean like there's like an ethnic history that is tightly coupled with the identity of the state. Yeah. Whereas America, we don't have that. We're founded on 13 colonies from different places across
people from
everywhere.
Immigration made us. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's to say nothing of slaves who were brought here and they added to the culture as well. But we do have a culture, and it's called American culture, and it actually means something. But we lost touch with national identity and national pride so much over the last several decades that even the idea of asserting that there's American culture has somehow become controversial.
Yeah, like, is it okay to say we all come here for the same reason? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like, generally, we're here for the same reason, and we come from different places. We come here for the same reason, and we make it work.
Yes.
What's wrong with that?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's what makes America, we have the highest rates of illegal and legal immigration in the world.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we've built something so desirable that people want to live here. How did we build that? Shared values around religious pluralism, freedom of speech, right to bear arms against a tyrannical government. Like, all these things were intentionally designed. And it used to be that people were proud to be Americans. But these days, like, we live in LA. Like, when's the last time you saw someone with an American flag? Public, right?
You get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, you almost get yourself in trouble. Like, there's something, like it's a hateful thing or something.
Well, so would you mind walking me through, sorry to interrupt, but I'm really fascinated by this. What is, and I think it's important just to talk about, if we could wave a magic wand, what is the right, broadly speaking, or what should be the core tenets of a good properly operating immigration program? Yeah. And the reason I bring it up is because I was listening to you, and you were talking about how the smartest minds in the world, who may not even be friends with each other, so they're not comparing information and comparing notes, but the smartest minds in the world who run some of the companies that have some of the most advanced technology in the world, the ones in America, are looking for, I believe, engineers who are like, I believe it was like, I think you quoted maybe Elon Musk saying it was the top 0.1% of engineering talent. We need them. We need them if we want to compete at the highest level. If we don't want to like wonder what the UFOs or balloons are in the air, we want to compete with that. We need the best and the brightest, and there's a shortage. And they're not here in America, and they're in other countries. And it would be great to have them become Americans. Yeah. it would be great. We want them, and we want all people with all types of trades or beliefs or whatever, and people who may not even have skills, but they're just not criminals, right? But going back to, let's just talk about companies in America who actually are pro-immigration, but want it the right way. I guess, sorry, I'm jumping. The reason I'm asking is because I see there's a problem there, and I'd researched it after I saw what you said. How should immigration work, broadly speaking? Or if you were to throw a dart at it, and I'm not going to hold you to this, and I know you just knee-jerking, but if you were to throw a dart at it and said, broadly, this is kind of how it should be, what would it be?
Yeah. So step one is we just got to lock down the southern border, period.
Got it.
We just need illegal immigration to be as close to zero as we can get it.
Got it.
Because it erodes the social fabric to bring people here illegally, and it's also a huge national security threat.
Yeah.
The second thing is we need to think about, okay, well, what does the immigration system, what's the intention of it? The intention should be to make America better, right? Like if you have a community and you're bringing in people from outside of your community, you want people to come in who are making your community better, right? Like if you have a house and you're going to allow people to live in the house, you want people who make the house better. So we should
be really good at keeping murderers out.
Yes. It's like no murderers, because that makes the house worse. So we want to have immigration. I would say not too much, because if we have too much too quickly, it becomes hard to integrate all those people, no matter how good your vetting system is, right? Because different cultures are just different, and we want to make sure that we don't have too much change too rapidly. I think we should be focusing on primarily importing the best and the brightest to fill the spots that are most essential to maintaining America's competitive dominance. So when we talk about like these top 0.1% of engineering roles, those are roles going to things like AI and machine learning and quantum computing and drones. Those are areas where we need to be the best in order for America to be first. And if America is first, that's good for Americans.
Yes.
Below that, I want to acknowledge, because one thing that's been lost in this legal immigration debate is, the current legal immigration system is kind of being abused to bring in cheaper labor for replacement level jobs. So people say like, oh, well, you have like these Indian IT people who are coming in taking jobs that Americans could do, and they're just undercutting them because they're willing to work for less. That shouldn't be happening. Okay. This should not be used for corporations to just like make their bottom line better. Like we do need to be protecting American jobs, because this is a home, not just a team. But there's certain jobs that we just like can't fill domestically. And there's been this whole cultural debate about, well, are you saying American culture is inferior? No, but science and math education here is not elite.
And you know what? Something I loved about what you said is like there are people in what people will call the far right that are just like, no, like even for these engineering jobs that we need to compete, like not just like technology, but like home security, like even though we need them, like, oh no, they should all come from America. And I'm trying not to quote you because I want you to respond. I don't want to misquote you, but you were saying something to the effect of, okay, that may be true. Like it would be great if they were all from America, because that means we'd be the smartest country in the world. But we need to catch up now in the next like 36 months. And we don't have time to grow a legion of top tier engineers in America because we're behind the ball.
Exactly.
And so we need to fix that issue so that we can have some of the best minds in the world being bred and developed here, regardless of where their parents come from and all that. But they've decided to be Americans. But in the meantime, we need to catch up. And those people are not in the United States, and we're in trouble. How wrong was my paraphrasing of yours? But
no, that was really good.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really good. I mean, basically to make.
And I'd never thought about it that way until you said it.
Yeah, it's like we have short-term and long-term needs. In the short term, we need to remain competitive, because if we don't remain competitive, our GDP is going to go down. We're going to be at a disadvantage from a national security standpoint, because if China's sending drones and we don't even know what they are and they're floating over New Jersey, that's a national security issue, right? So like, we need the best and the brightest now. And we also need to long-term make sure that the best and the brightest are coming from the US. But the long-term change takes a long time.
It's going to take a while.
Right? You got to fix the education system. That takes a while. It doesn't necessarily need to take decades, but it's not going to take months. So in the meantime, like, let's make sure that the H-1B visa system, which is the system that's used for highly skilled labor, is not being abused to just undercut American jobs. Let's make sure that we're filling the shortage with talent from elsewhere. We're not making them citizens. They're here as temporary labor, because H-1B lasts for 3 years, and then you can renew it for another 3 years. And in the long term, like, let's invest in education, math and science education, where 28th out of 37 when it comes to math among first world nations. We're 12th when it comes to science education. Like, these are just the facts, and it's been the case for a long time. So we can get there, right? Like during the space race, like there's a huge emphasis on math and science, and we can also create the cultural shift where
we can
people,
get back.
aspire to that. It's like 54% of Gen Zs want to be a media influencer. It's like, you know, you're a media influencer, I am too, and I'm glad there's some of us, but we shouldn't have half of Gen Zs wanting to do this, right? Like we need some people doing that, and some people should be going into science and math. And we got to make that appealing.
Yeah.
So
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's like a lot of time I feel like one of my frustrations is it feels like the various sides of a debate are not hearing the nuances, and they can't even understand the other side. And it's like, I think both sides have something to say here. Yeah. And there is a truth, but the truth incorporates some of both what they're both saying, and both of them are also saying wrong things.
What do you let's talk about speech if you don't mind, and then education. But free speech, right? I think also I feel like I now feel uncomfortable saying I believe in free speech, or even saying something like I believe in radical free speech. What do you mean by that, right? All I'm saying is like I believe in the idea of free speech. Do I believe that hate speech is good? Absolutely not. Do I believe hate crimes are good? No, right? They should be prosecuted. But I do think it's a slippery slope if we don't let people say what's on their minds. Number one, we don't know who to address and who needs changing if they're wrong, right? And I think anything that shuts down the conversation, stops the conversation, I just think is negative. And then lastly, my feeling is, this is where I'm coming from, and mute me or correct me where I'm off, but I want to hear what you think, is that in a government where people have, not this government, but just any government, where now the poor people have lost all rights. They lost their guns. They've lost every ounce of control that they have. The politicians are corrupt. Which is happening at all levels. There's still some of that here.
Yeah.
Free speech is our last weapon. The fact that no one can stop you from doing this is our last weapon for the people who are not in power, right? That's why I think it's so important. And I understand there's negative issue. There's always going to be negative implications of everything great, like technology. It can go the wrong way. You're seeing it happen now. But at the end of the day, we can't get rid of the internet. We don't want to, right? Maybe we should. But free speech, for sure, we can't get rid of. That's my feeling, and I'm really concerned of what I'm seeing right now. What are your thoughts about, number one, why there's an attack on free speech? I'm seeing it in the UK a lot. Yeah. Why it's not okay all of a sudden here? Why is there even a debate about it? And what might be the solution?
Yeah,
it's a lot. I know.
No, it's. I love this topic, so thanks for bringing it up. Fundamentally, the reason why the founding fathers constructed America the way it was, or the way it is because they experienced what happens in the absence of these constitutional protections. They experience what happens if you don't have free speech in England, which is where they were coming from. They experience what happens if there's not separation of church and state, because the Church of England basically used state power to prosecute religious minorities.
That's right.
Right. All of this was very intentionally designed. Why do we have a Second Amendment? And every time there's something tragic like a school shooting or something, people are like, we need to restrict gun rights. Well, the reason why we have a Second Amendment is to protect the first. Yeah. Because if you don't have guns, and the government has guns, and the government's corrupt,
you can't say anything.
If they take away your guns, you can't say anything. Right? So the free speech is a first defense. Yeah. And the right to bear arms is a last defense, actually. Yeah. So what's happening is, and people speculate, like, why is this happening? This is like some global Illuminati, and I really don't know. But I know behaviorally what's happening is people are reacting to one issue, and hate speech is an issue. Yeah. Misinformation is another issue, but they're not correctly prioritizing. It's just like the racist versus rapist thing. Yeah. Is racism bad? Absolutely. But what's worse, rape or racism?
We have to prioritize.
Yes. Right? We can take care of all of them, but we need to pick like what's the most important thing, especially in a crisis scenario.
That's right.
So when people see this misinformation or they see racism, and I'm on X, I deal with this stuff all the time. Yeah. It's like, yes, it's unpleasant, but you know what's worse? No one being able to speak what they want at all. That's worse than a racist saying something on the internet, because as an individual, I can deal with that. Yeah. And even if someone lies, I can deal with that. I can do my own research if I have the will. But if I literally can't go say what I believe, because I can be thrown in prison because the state has a monopoly on violence. Yeah. That's what government is. It's a monopoly on violence. And We do that because we don't want to have individuals using violence. We're
Yeah,
like,
chaos.
all right, the only people can use violence are the people who are accountable to the people, the government. But if the government's not accountable to the people because we don't have right to bear arms and we don't have free speech,
Yeah, it can get out
the
of hand really
government
quick.
becomes tyrannical. It always happens. It has to happen. That's what the government does. This is how we keep the government in check. So yeah, I think people are reacting emotionally. Like you see the thing in front of you and that feels the worst.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh my God, this person said this hateful thing online. Like, can you believe that? Like, obviously it gets people riled up. But to understand the deeper evil requires thinking several steps ahead. And once you're that many steps ahead, if it happens, it's very hard to go back.
Yes, it's really hard to wind back a loss of free speech. And do you think there's something to be said for, and I'm asking a question right now, and I'm not afraid to say what I believe, but I think it's also, I want to make sure if anybody criticizes me, you criticize me for the right thing. So I'm asking a question here. I have my opinions and I'm happy to share it. But is it okay, like, I'll use X for an example, right? There's a lot of misinformation on X. There's a lot of hate speech on X, but when I'm looking for the truth, it's the first place I go. And I think I'm intelligent enough, or not even intelligent, just like have enough common sense that if I see something, I just don't, and it confirms my belief or disconfirms my belief or whatever. If I see something, doesn't matter what it is, I don't say, oh, it's true right away. I say, someone just said that. Let me see what everybody else is saying. All right, let me go reflect on, let me see what AP is saying. Let me see what Al Jazeera is saying. Let me see what CNN is saying. I can get that done in a minute, 60, maybe 3 minutes, right? Let me see what Elon's saying. Let me see what Trump is saying. Let me see what Biden's saying. Let me see what all these people are posting about the issue. I'm now starting to get a little semblance of truth. Let me see when they interview people on the streets, like in New Orleans, what are those people saying? And then I start to form my own opinion, right, of what might be the truth, and I get close to it, and I'm not dead set on it, and I'm not afraid for someone to challenge it, right? I think with free speech and platforms like X where people can say whatever they want, I don't think people are that stupid. There are stupid people, or whatever you want to call them, that will just look at it and say, oh, look, and just don't. I know those people are out there, but I think generally speaking, especially the people that are tasked with making big decisions, know how to reflect on what's real and what's not. And the whole world will get better if we just let free speech exist. Yes. We'll start to and there'll be systems for sifting through BS, things that are not true. There'll be platforms that are like, hey, before we post this, we fact check. All that will come if we just let people say what's on their mind. The systems and the cultural elements, or whatever you want to call it, that are going to make it easier to sift through the craziness and find the truth. They're going to exist if we let people, if we let free speech exist, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I feel about it, which is why I'm so pro X and I'm so pro platforms that just let people do what they want, because I think the riffraff in the long term does get weeded out. What's your opinion on that?
I agree.
Okay.
Look, we have to just agree that it is axiomatically true that the truth is good and that good wins in the end. Period. Yeah. So if we think that the truth doesn't work, then of course we're going to censor and we're going to try to control, try to tell people what the truth is. Yeah. But if we trust in people's fundamentally ability to detect truth when it's in front of them, and we don't coddle them, then not only do we remain connected to our own inner sense of what's truth versus what's lies, then we can all get aligned with the truth. And the good news is the truth works, right? Like
it's consistent.
Yeah, right? Like in engineering, it's like, if you want to build a rocket and go to Mars, you better be in touch with the truth, because it doesn't matter how much you feel like it should go to Mars. It's just not going to make it there.
A rocket doesn't care about your feelings.
Yeah. And people, they think, oh, well, that's physics. Philosophy is different. No, it's not. Right? In philosophy, I actually majored in philosophy. There's logic. There's logic. Like you test theories logically. There's contradictions. There's contrapositive. There's all these things that you use as like a tool for understanding the world, right? And there's still truth in intangibles. Just because it's not tangible doesn't mean there's no truth. Yeah. So yeah, like part of the problem is in our education system, it starts very young. People are not taught to think for themselves. Kids go to school and they get conditioned and they learn to memorize everything. Yeah. So I think this is actually reflected in science and math, because science and math are objective. Real hard science and math are just subjective. Yeah. Right? It's like 2 times 2 equals 4 and 2 plus 2 equals 4.
It'll always happen that way.
Always happen. You can do a mathematical proof too. Yeah. But children, they're not actually taught very well. Our education system doesn't teach, like we should be teaching kids physics. Like it can start like, very very basic and you make it more advanced, but like teach people the language of the universe, which is math and physics.
Yeah.
And teach people like there's a way of thinking about morality that operates that way too. And some things are subjective, right?
Yeah.
Some things like, you know, what's the best food? Well, that's a different
Yeah.
conversation than like, you know, how should we treat women and children? Like
Yeah.
there's objective truths, and then there are things that are not truth, they're just subjective preferences.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't abandon the former because of the latter. So yeah, we need to, this is a whole bigger diatribe on education, but
I would love to hear it. That was actually on my list, the education system.
Yeah, our education system's not education, it's indoctrination. We're not actually preparing people to learn how to think and process the world.
Yeah.
Instead, we're teaching them like memorize a bunch of facts, take this test, you forget the facts anyway the moment you pass the test, and then you go to the next grade.
So does that explain how would you explain what's going on in colleges right now? And what I mean by that is, you know, I'll be careful not to get into, or we can, but the I just think how conflicted Americans are about what's going on in Israel, right? We're all conflicted. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should be so conflicted, but we are. But in colleges, there are students that are like doing some real, like stuff that like I would have gotten in so much trouble in high school and college if I was doing it at that time, not just because of race or anything, just any student that would have not been tolerated in high school or college 20 years ago, right? Fires, like, and there's always been protests on college, but now it's like not like I saw barricades like, oh, if you're Jewish, you can't come past here, or running Jewish kids off campus and things of that nature. And at first I'm like, oh, maybe these are isolated, but we're seeing a lot of it, right? And just that type of hate, right? And the colleges not stopping it, and they're starting to now. There's starting to be a trend, but that went on for a long time. How does that happen? How does that happen in your opinion? And I think, and I'm asking in an objective way, like how do we get there as human beings where all of a sudden, oh, it was cool that was my friend last year, but this year you're a Jew, and because I don't understand or agree with what's going on across the ocean, I now hate you, and I'm going to make you afraid? This is America, and this has nothing to do with you, and you don't even understand the issue, right or wrong, even if you're right, even if you're wrong, even if you're abundantly right, why is that person afraid to go to the cafeteria? Like, what happened in the education system to get us here, in your opinion? And I'm asking because you went to an Ivy League.
Yeah. And by the way, no topic is off topics for me. So
okay.
I'll talk about anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you know.
That's refreshing.
Yeah, I think we need to.
Yeah.
And the things that we don't talk about, we need to talk about the most.
Amen.
So with this whole Israel-Palestine thing, I think part of it just comes down to people are thinking in generalities rather than being specific, right? So I'll give you both sides of it, right? From the perspective of a lot of Jewish people and Israelites, they were attacked by terrorists on October 7th. Israel has a right to defend themselves. They're defending themselves against terrorists. And in order to defend themselves, they need to go to Palestine. They need to eliminate Hamas, which is explicitly an anti-Jewish organization. And there's collateral damage and civilians die. That's their logic.
Yeah. Are
there people in there who are fundamentally like Zionists, who like extreme Zionists who want to eradicate Palestinians? Of course there are. Is that all of them? Of course not. On the other side, there are Palestinians and pro-Palestinian people who say, hey, Israel has oppressed Palestinians and kept them in positions of poverty and squalor for generations now. Yeah. What Hamas did was an understandable reaction to the depravity of the condition that they've been put in. Terrorism is bad, but that's what happens. It's cause and effect. And now Israel is enacting a genocide among civilians who were not even involved in the violent act. Yeah. That's their view. Part of the problem is when, rather than actually like trying to reconcile these views in a sober discussion and understand what the two sides are, it very quickly gets emotional and we resort to labels. So like terms like, oh, you're being anti-Semitic. It's like, first of all, Jewish people and the Israeli government are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. Just like the American people and the American government are not the same thing. Yeah. There are people in Israel who don't agree with what their government is doing. There are people in Israel who do agree with what their government is doing. But as we see in America, there's plenty of shit that the American government does that we don't agree with. Yeah. Similarly, there are people in Palestine who do support what Hamas has been doing. There are other people who are like, no, we do not support this kind of stuff. And in fact, it's blowing back on us. Yeah. rather than having that kind of nuanced discussion and trying to understand, okay, like what's the best argument from either side, everyone's engaging with the worst argument from the other side, and saying like, you guys are racist, and anyone who agrees with any part of your argument is also a racist. And as a result, people take extreme measures because they're taking extreme views of the other side. So it's similar to saying like, oh, well, anyone who doesn't want open borders is a racist. It's like, no. There are racists who don't want open borders, but not everyone who wants an open border is a racist. It's like, okay.
Why is that such a hard thing?
Well, this shouldn't be hard.
Yeah.
But because people get so emotionally riled up, instead of focusing on they would rather feel right than be happy. And if you want to be happy, there needs to be harmony between the two sides. If you just want to feel right, then say the most emotional, extreme argument.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, then you get to feel right, and congratulations, you're not going to end up very happy. So that's what's happening. And unfortunately, as someone who actually ran in pretty, I would say, woke circles when I was at Harvard, especially in my first freshman year, I was just trying to find my people, and I was like, all right, cool, this is a group. They seem to know what's up. One of the things about being young is there's like a lack of maturity. Right. I think the beauty of being young is there's an innocence and a clarity on like what the world should be. Yeah. But the lack of maturity on what it actually takes to create that world.
Yeah, that's right.
So people will see this and they're like, you know what? Any action is justified. I don't care if I have to start being hateful against another group because I need to use hate to counter hate. I need to use discrimination to counter discrimination. Yeah. I need to use violence to counter violence. But what people don't understand is when they employ these tools as a means to an end, they keep perpetuating the same use of those means. Over and over, right? So they become hostile, and it's like, well, you know what? I'll give you an example, right? The Luigi Mangione, United Healthcare killers scenario. People are saying, well, you know what? This United Healthcare CEO, he was denying claims, and people were dying, and people are not getting life-saving coverage, and there were corporate greed. All true. Yep. All true.
All facts.
And we need to fix that. Yeah. However,
there's evidence that supports it. For sure.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. But we shouldn't be using violence.
Guess why?
Right?
Because that could be you. But go ahead.
Yeah. Because it never stops with the first violent act. Even in a best case scenario where we reform the healthcare system because of what this murder, and that's a best case. I highly doubt that's going to happen. But let's say I'm going to give you the strongest case.
Magic one, it's fixed.
Right? They reform the system. Well, now you've normalized violence as the way to get things done. So anytime someone has a societal grievance, it's like, well, it worked there. I'm going to get violent here. And then I'm going to murder another CEO.
Assassination, yeah.
Yeah, why stop there? Let me blow up the whole claims department. Let me blow up the whole headquarters. Yeah. Let me blow up the entire board of directors. Oh, it's a publicly held company. Everyone holding the shares is complicit in violence. Let's kill them too. Yeah. So, and that's how complete societal collapse happens. So are there cases where you need to resist violent force with violent force? Of course, that's why we have the Second Amendment. If the government is literally going to houses and shooting people, that's where you're going to want your guns. Yeah. But outside of meeting physical violent force with physical violent resistance, we need to avoid violence at all costs. And people say stuff like, oh, well, what else could they do? Use your voice, use your vote, don't use violence. Yes. It works. We just elected Trump, who picked RFK Jr. and empowered him to manage the biggest budget in government, the Health and Human Services. Sure. And he's actually going to do radical things that I've never seen someone in that position try to do. He's trying to ban pharmaceutical ads, right? He's trying to fix perverse incentives between big pharma and government and lobbying and all this stuff. That's real change. That's real change that doesn't have the second order consequences of collapsing civilization. Yeah. So for me, I'm like, did you even vote for RFK, or did you vote for Trump who's voting for RFK? No. So why are you supporting someone who's using violence? Right? Did that guy use his voice and his vote? No, he jumped immediately to killing a man who had kids. He had a wife. There's an impact there. Yeah. So it's like, I understand why people are upset. But we got to go past the emotions, and we need to get past first order thinking and think what actually works. And people will say things like, well, we've been campaigning for universal health care for years. Yeah. And it sucks that it takes so much work to make major change. Yep. And that's also what life is. That's what civilization is. It's hard. Yeah. You don't get born into a utopia, right? Civilization requires all of our work and our sane, calm commitment to making something that we all want to live in. Perpetually. Yeah, perpetually. Yeah. And I know it's felt like it doesn't even matter who's in office, But things have fundamentally changed in the last several years. The game has changed. Like, not only voting has always worked when there's enough people who actually care enough to vote.
Yeah.
But now voices can be, we're talking right now.
Yeah.
This conversation will have a ripple impact over maybe dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people. We don't know.
Yep.
People need to feel like they can actually change the world. And I think people feel disempowered. They feel like they can't. So when people feel disempowered, they get desperate and they start doing stuff like that to say it's justified. It's like, no. You jump to Z when you need to go through A through Y before we even talk about that.
Yeah. Hey, man. And I was going to ask you, so explain, and the last question on the education thing is, well, I have actually another question that's kind of somewhat different, but when I look at, I've been to Israel. I've also been to China. And the reason I'm saying that, I'm just bringing up, I've been to every continent except for Antarctica, I think. No, I haven't been to Africa yet. I'm going there soon.
Oh, shit.
But long story short, but I've seen, like, I remember going when I went to China, and they wouldn't, we were on a mission trip, and we just wanted to go, like, help, like, clean up a school and, like, you know, hammer and nail and just help, right? And, like, we were there for 2 weeks, and when we got there, the government was like, nope. And it became a sightseeing trip. And that's fine. But the point is, like, well, who cares? Like, but at the same time, that was when I realized, like, oh, this is different, you know? And I've been to other countries and I went to go see the slums there. Very different. Like, people living in cages, right? And I think that perspective allows me to, like, question anything I see on the news or what we think about other people, and so on and so forth. And so when I think and so I understand that type of experience gives me a different worldview than someone may have if they've never left the country and it's their first year at some college or whatever. I get that. But I also feel like if, like, people are reading history books still, I would assume, and we have the internet. So maybe that's the problem. How do we get to a point where there's, and I'm not making fun, right? I'm not making fun. This is a very serious question, where we see someone who is not just pro, but, like, very outspoken about LGBTQ rights, right? Very outspoken, right? Holding a sign that is literally with the words Hamas, like pro-Hamas, right? Do they not understand that it's embedded in the Hamas, I can't even call it culture because it's, you know, like Hamas, it's embedded that we don't generally like Americans. It's okay because I won't even talk about the Israel thing because I guess I'm talking about Americans. We don't respect women in general. We don't think women deserve the same rights that they get in the United States. In fact, it's okay to stone them from time to time. It's okay to rape kids. If you're Hamas, all these things, generally speaking, have been proven to be okay, right? We definitely don't like people who are gay or LGBTQ+. In our country, if you're living here, we'd murder you, right? And stone you maybe, right? That's also been proven. So if you know some of this, even a pinch of this stuff exists for someone you're holding up a sign for, how could you hold it up? And I'm asking this question because I'm challenging my understanding of the world. Because I'm like, if people feel that strongly to scream at their Jewish friend, run them out of their, make them feel uncomfortable, hold up a sign like that, and I'm missing something. I don't understand the world. Forget whether they're right or wrong. I don't understand the dynamic that lets that happen in a place where people are supposed to be getting educated. Yeah. How does that happen? What would be your guess?
Yeah, they're not getting educated. They're getting indoctrinated. These institutions are ideologically captured. I mean, if you look at academia, it's overwhelmingly liberal leaning.
Got it.
Overwhelmingly. And I mean, there's a bigger question of, like, what are universities actually supposed to be doing? And I think the problem starts way before that. It starts in K through 8, where they're not actually getting an education; they're getting indoctrination. But when you get into academia, we need our intelligista. We need these academics and professors. But it's very easy when you're in that environment to be disconnected from common sense reality, because they don't make things with their hands. They don't have to operate a business where they're accountable. They get a salary. Someone else is making a lot of the hard decisions that actually create enough abundance for them to go just do research.
Yeah.
So it's like you have these professors in their ivory towers who are getting into these, like, very vague, like, honestly, some of the stuff that they're calling is like science is like, it's just made up. A lot of these disciplines are just made up, like gender studies and sociology. It's like there's some useful inquiry there, but there's also a lack of understanding that you're purely theorizing.
Yeah.
And it's okay to purely theorize because we theorize to get to good theory, but recognize you're purely theorizing.
Yeah, it's okay to also recognize that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we need intelligence and common sense. They're not the same thing, but they're equally important. So the first thing is, again, the educational system is not actually educating people properly. That's part of the problem. And part of the thing with, the downside of the conservatism is it can become overly skeptical and rigid.
Mm-hmm.
The downside of liberalism is it becomes overly permissive and has no boundaries.
Yeah.
And like everything's true, everything's permissive, whatever you feel at the time is most important. Whatever complex word salad you form makes a good theory. And when you have that kind of environment, then kids can justify anything.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first thing. Like there needs to be a reality check. And this gets into a bigger discussion. There's certain cultures. You talked about China, for example, right?
Yeah.
I remember I've been to China a few times too. I remember being there, and I remember one of the things I observed was, there's old people like outside hanging out, playing sports.
In the mornings too, yeah.
Yeah.
They move their bodies and everything, yeah.
Yeah, it's like you never really see that here.
Not in America.
Not in America.
They're out dancing, ballroom dancing. I don't know if you saw that. All types of stuff in the morning, yeah.
Yeah, they're like active and healthy and taken care of. It's like, why? Well, they have strong family units. And part of that is strong respect for elders. There's this idea that you're not, when you're old, you're like put into a nursing home and go away. You don't know what's going on. It's like, no. You have the wisdom of elders. We got to listen to you because you've actually lived life. You have experience that I can't have, no matter how brilliant you are as a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
But when we abandon this idea, I think at many levels, like we've abandoned the idea of God, we've abandoned the idea of family, we abandoned the idea of country. So a lot of these traditional structures that helped us make sense of reality and prevented us from going too far are gone. And as a result, it's like everyone's making up their own morality. Yeah. Everyone's coming up with their own ideas of what's justifiable. It's your truth, my truth. There's no objective truth. And you get to some really wacky outcomes. So with a lot of these kids, it's like we need to go back to like some traditional education.
You brought up something very similar. Like there need to be boundaries, and people who are overly conservative create too many boundaries and they go sometimes too far. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, if we get way too liberal, then it's like you can make up anything and anything's okay, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I've always felt, and just want to hear your response to this, is that, and I felt this at a young age, and I did grow up in a church, but I've always kind of I felt like I had my own opinions. Mm-hmm. And but I just felt like this is a horrible analogy, and humans are not cows. All right, everybody heard that? But just to give a little visual to it, and then I'll get a little more detail. But like we grew up raising cows, and like we have fences. They can't stop the cow. If the cow wants to like run through the fence, they're gonna run through the fence, right? And you have to fix it. Or sometimes they get really crafty on like sliding under it. The barbed wire on the fence does not hurt the cow, right? Mm-hmm. And so the fence is like a suggestion at the end of the day. And the really crafty cows can like actually know how to like move the locks and stuff like that. You see them do it late at night when they think you're asleep. And so but then the reality is you have your boundaries and one will veer. And then sometimes the same one veers all the time. Every single time it's the same cow, right? And you know he's going to come back eventually because he doesn't want to be away from the herd, but he needs to be naughty. That's just what he needs, or he just wants to veer. But if we have no fence, right, then they go everywhere and people steal them and so on and so forth. Now, humans are not cows. I said that again. I just gave a visual. So this is how I look at being leaning conservative, right, or center right a little bit, or just having rules. That's a better way to say it. Now having rules is considered conservative or following the law. If we have rules, people are going to venture outside the rules. And I think when people venture outside the rules, it's okay. That's human nature. We need to be naughty. We need to be rebellious. We need to feel freedom. We're going to do those things. But at least there's rules. So if we're wrong about what we're doing, we know where to come back to. And if we're actually doing something illegal and hurting people, there's a law for that, right? Yeah. And so I think there need to be laws. But sometimes people go outside the boundaries and we find out, you know what, that's okay. This law needs to be fixed. Okay, there's a process for that, and it's not always quick enough. I get that. But I guess my point is I think there's just something to be said for having rules, right? And I don't agree with all the rules, but like let me break them in my privacy, in the privacy of my own home, or break them in, once or twice when I'm 18 or 19, and be able to teach my kid that there's rules, and if you're going to break them, there's consequence. Like there's just something that be said for having rules and how it keeps us just from going too far. Right? Should it make us be in a position where we're hated by other people, where we're discriminated? Absolutely not. And hate and discrimination, you should get thrown in jail for it, right? Like true acting on hate and discriminating. But outside of that, like, I just feel like rules make for healthier environments. And people are, and the last thing I'll say on it is I feel like people are, when I say naughty, I just mean disobeying the rules. We're always going to have a natural tendency to disobey the rules. And so to me, if the rules are here, the fence is here, and we move the fence out 100 feet, well, we're still going to want to cross over the fence 100 feet out. And then if you move the feet 1,000 feet out, we're still going to want to hop through the fence, right? If you use the cow analogy. So that's how I feel about it. And I'm not saying I've never heard anybody else say that. I'm not saying I'm right. What's your feeling on that dynamic, you know?
Yeah.
Because I know it can go the wrong way sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look back 100 years, it was the wrong way for a lot of people who were here that weren't born, that were maybe from Africa or slaves or India or China. Like, a lot of people were treated wrong, and there was laws around that. Get that. But if I'm looking at where we're at now, I think there's something to be said for rules.
Yeah. I love the analogy.
Okay.
And I think, the difference here, because I actually think it's useful to think of it in the terms of cows. Like, okay, well, the cows don't know any better, right? They can't understand why the fence is there.
Yeah, that's true.
They're just trying to get past the fence. They have no idea. They're unconsciously trying to violate the rules. They don't realize why the rules are there. We need rules, but we need people to understand why the rules exist, like from first principles perspective. I grew up in a Catholic school, went to Catholic church, kind of fell out of that, was atheist, agnostic for a while, then became more spiritual when I had my awakening. And then now I pray to Jesus again, started going to church again, and it's like a non-denominational church. I think part of the reason I rejected Catholicism is because it felt so dogmatic and just fire and brimstone, do this or you're going to hell. I was like, well, I don't know anyone who's in hell. so prove it to me. It's like, all right, well, no, then I'm just not going to follow the rules. Now, as an adult, I look at some of these rules, like the 10 Commandments. It's like, it's pretty simple rules that you follow so that you can have a happy life. It's like, why do thou shalt not kill? Why? Because even if you get away, even if no one knows that you killed someone, you're fracturing your own psyche. And the root of the word psyche is soul, actually. You're fracturing your own soul. Wow. And so it's like, oh, that sounds vague. Well, what happens if a soldier goes to war and kills someone, even for a heroic national cause? He can get PTSD.
That's right.
He traumatizes himself from the act, because no matter what your reason is, killing, murder is murder. So
most people don't recover from that.
Yeah, it can be hugely disruptive to your whole life, doing that to another human being. So the reason we have rules is not because someone told you, but because it's good for you. Yeah. And education should be about teaching people, helping them reason to how it's good for them. It's like, hey, I'm telling you not to steal. Why? You could even get away with stealing. Why? Because you're going to know that you're a thief.
Yep.
And that's going to erode your self-esteem. That's going to erode your self-trust. That's going to have global impact on your life.
True.
So these rules that we have, like, we shouldn't have so many rules that we can't function.
Of course.
Right? But we need enough rules so that we can function together. And the rules that allow us to function together should be rules that we can all agree, yeah, I'm doing this for me. Yeah. Because if I don't follow this rule, it's going to hurt me directly. Or it's going to hurt society in a way that hurts me. Yeah. So it's self-interest at the end of the day. So the reason good rules align with self-interest. So, yeah, I don't think people understand that. It's like rules is like almost this bad, dirty word. Same thing with responsibility. As if people think of responsibility as like, oh, you're being irresponsible, like that's being judgmental. No. We're telling you, if you're being irresponsible, you're harming yourself. Yeah. You might not see in the short term, but it's harming you. And we all have various levels of responsibility that we're not taking and various levels of our life. We don't have to feel like it's judgmental. It's actually care. It's like, hey, if you're raising a kid, I don't know if you have any kids, but it's like, you teach them rules. Like, and brush your teeth.
They're looking for them too.
They need that structure to thrive.
Actually looking for them. I like it. It reminds me of how in California it's just getting cleaned up now, but like there was laws passed a few years ago that meant like you can just go rob a store, and as long as you don't take, I think it's like more than $800 of stuff, like no one's chasing you. You're good. And it didn't hit home until I was at the Apple store in Santa Monica on 3rd Street? 3rd Street Promenade, where I used to hang out all the time. I went to school out here. I was there, and I'm at the Apple store, and I'm trying to pay for something. And in real time, 3 things happen. Guy walks in, and is sitting there, and he grabs the iPhone, puts it in his pocket, grabs another one. And he was just cleaning up shop. And nobody fucking budged. And I'd only seen it one other place like this. And I'll get back to the story. I was in Brazil years ago with a friend of mine who actually was part of a political assassination recently. He was a writer. Wow. And but we went to school together, and he had moved down there with his family. But anyway, I was there, and I was at the area where like the young people hang out on the weekends, and it's like there's a big crowd. And I'm walking, and these 3 or 4 kids run up on this lady, grab her here. They're trying to get her purse, pulling her hair, and she goes like this, tucks, and just keeps on soldiering through and walking. And the kids are just pulling, scratching, clawing, and finally they gave up, and she kept going, and they walked away. This is 2012-ish. And nobody did anything. No one said, hey, stop, or like there's grown men around. No one did anything. And it wasn't that she got robbed. That didn't shock me. It was the fact that like the response that no one did anything, and they knew no one was going to do anything. They just walked away. Blew me away. And so now I know, like, don't carry a purse in Brazil. But I get it. You just assimilate. But here, I saw that. No one froze. No one did anything. No one pointed. Nothing. Slowly, store manager walks over. I mean, an attendant, like a salesman, walks over to the manager who I'm talking to. I'm asking some questions. And she goes, excuse me one second. He goes, and then they're just kind of like, oh, like, we're not going to do anything. And she's like, yeah, just leave it alone. So I was like, all right, that's bizarre. He didn't come over like, oh my God, society changing in real time, for me at least. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I was like, all right, they're not going to do anything. I was like, hey guys, can I run this? can you check me out? I'm like, all right, they don't care. I don't care now. I just need to get back home. But that was the weirdest thing for me, right? And so I guess my point is, if I'm that person, right? And who knows where they come from or why they feel like they need to do that. That's a whole nother problem that we need to fix. Mm-hmm. But long story short, if I'm that person and now you've allowed me, or just me, and like me, say I get to my most desperate place and I need to go steal, right? And there are rules against it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to steal. I'm going to feed my family. I'm going to take care of myself. Get that. Yeah. But if there's no rules, I'm going to casually walk in. I'm never going to pay for groceries. I'm never going to pay for anything. I see it at Trader Joe's all the time. People just walk in, fill up their bag, and walk out. It happens right across the street. Wow. So I guess my point is, like, that is to me a great example of, like, without rules, it goes too far, where actually people just say you don't have to pay for anything, you know? And I don't, if you extrapolate, and I love California, I actually don't want to move. Mm-hmm. But if you extrapolate that out, it just goes to a deep, dark place. And I can't understand how that doesn't register for people and how they can actually vote for it. And is that just groupthink, or what, like?
You know, when people are frustrated, and again, it comes back to emotional versus logic. When people are frustrated, they justify anything.
They skip it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll say, well, you know, this is an unjust society, and these people weren't taken care of, yeah. So it's maybe stealing's unjust, but it's an injustice in response to an injustice, so it's fine.
That's a logic that people
that's where they go. Right. And there's a few components. This is a much broader discussion, but it's like, okay, well, first of all, in America, I think there's a lot more valid means to repair your situation than people actually acknowledge. Yeah. But we avoid actually identifying that sometimes because we don't want to sound judgmental of this desperate person. But it's like, yeah, just because you're desperate doesn't mean you're justified, right? And again, there's so many. You just haven't gotten as creative and resourceful as you can. Yeah. And look, life is hard, right?
And it's also not fair, and it's hard, and it is what it is.
Yeah, it just is what it is. And we all have to do what we need to do to survive. And the reason we have civil society is to prevent us from doing things against other people to survive. Yeah. And yeah, are there things that we need to make better? Absolutely. But, you know, as someone who's traveled a lot yourself, you see how much worse it can get. Yeah. You know, sometimes I'll have people say stuff to me like, it's not a civil society. It's like, have you been anywhere else in the world? It's like
anywhere else.
Yeah, anywhere else. Like, do you realize how good you have it over here? Yeah. And we can't, if we throw out all of that, it's like we return to a state of nature. Yeah. And I remember during the George Floyd riots, I lived in an apartment, and down the street there was a gas station that got robbed. Yeah. And it was a wake-up call. I was like, shit, I don't have a gun. Yeah. Like, if they just come to my house and try to rob me, what am I going to do?
That was my point too. Yeah.
Then they started looting and sacking 3rd Street Promenade. Yeah. And I'm like, oh shit, that's what an uncivilized society looks like.
So that, keep going, but that is my whole point on what I was saying before, and I forgot as I was rambling, was that when you get to that point and you know people can just steal anything, then I need a gun.
Yep.
Right? Because I know that it goes to Trader Joe's, it goes to Apple, and eventually it's like, just go open his door. A friend of mine across the street just and has the most like one of the most well-tuned security systems, and you can barely get in the neighborhood. You have to get in the line and to get into the neighborhood, and there's like guards and all this stuff. And somebody came right in his house. They waited till he left, robbed him, and left. And another friend of mine who's a pretty prominent basketball player with his wife and his kids, some people came in and robbed him while they were there. And so, it happens, right? But it shouldn't happen there. It's interesting. And they were very highly tech-enabled, super savvy. I believe they're from Chile. I believe Chile, but somewhere in South America where they're like, really like, they know how to outsmart. They have access to AI and they know how to use it and so on and so forth. And they know how to jam signals, and I can go on and on, but they're super sophisticated. That's the point. But my point is now I need a gun. Like I was practicing shooting yesterday. I want to go get a shotgun because I'm like, my aim is not that good. So I need a shotgun. And then I need a lot of bullets because I'm just thinking if this keeps on going, and now to me, you've turned a person like me into somebody who might be a threat, you know? And I think that's why we need laws.
Yeah.
Not just because it should be illegal for that person to do what they're doing, but if that's going on, it's going to create a whole dynamic where people don't feel safe. And when they don't feel safe, they start looking at people different. They start keeping their gun in their car. Yeah. And once again, we have a problem. I think we do.
Yeah. And going back to the universities, most kids have never been in a violent scenario. So they don't know how ugly things can get, how fast. Like a lot of you people who are protesting, it's like, you know, you're talking about pro-Hamas from $1,000 iPhone. Yeah. While you're attending a college that your parents paid tuition for. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, congratulations. Like, you know, celebrate the fact that you don't have to deal with some of the harsher realities of life. Yeah. But also to recognize that there are harsher realities of life. Yeah. And it's calm, sane, hardworking people who are like trying to construct society who keep you safe from that. Yeah. And when you erode that, you don't realize how close you're putting yourself to harm's way.
Yeah, because you've never seen it.
You've never seen it. Yeah. So, I'm not sitting here as some tough guy, right? Like I'm not here telling you like I can handle. I don't want a state of nature, right? Like if it's like 3 guys and there's me, there's nothing I can do. I lose, right? It's like I don't want to have to get violent. Like no one wants to have to get violent. Right, you were sitting on top of a boxing gym. Like you want to get violent in intentional environments and keep it there. Yeah. You don't want to go out on the street and have to deal with that. That's a chaotic situation. Doesn't matter how strong, how smart, how capable you are. It can get gross and ugly really fast. Yeah. And I don't think people realize like when people are desperate and mass amounts of people are desperate, how evil things can get.
Yeah, they don't. I think, and the last thing I'll say on it is like, I feel like what happened recently in New York, right? The guy who choked. I think he choked the guy.
Daniel
and killed
Penny
him.
And Jordan Neely.
Yeah. And which is interesting, the way the whole dynamic is interesting. But I think, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Navy SEAL, and he talked about the different stages of awareness, essentially. And he's like, you go from, I think, white to yellow, could be orange and then red. White is like totally oblivious. Yellow is like cautiously aware of everything, knowing where the exits are, and I'm ready. Yeah. Orange, I think it was orange. It's another color. It's like, all right, I'm engaging. Like this is about to happen. But I'm, hey, calm down. Whatever it is. Taking a step back, leaving, whatever it is, but you're dealing with a situation that is about to get out of control. And then red is like, I'm engaging, you know? And the point is, I would assume, because, I don't know, but I feel when I see that situation is because of what's going on, because we don't feel like we're in a safe environment, because of the environment that we're in, or the environment that's going on in New York with lawlessness, basically. Yeah. I think it puts a man like that, I'll use me for an example. It takes me from white to yellow to orange at all times. I'm at orange and I'm ready to go red. Yeah. Because I don't feel safe, right? And then I think that's what happened. I'm very sad that man got choked out and died. And I'm very sad that this guy's, his life is getting screwed up right now, the guy that choked him. And the whole thing is sad. But I think that's what happens when people, especially real men, essentially, are in the orange or whatever that color before red is at all times. And also it was an accident. I get that. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this. This was one I've been thinking a lot about and talked a bit about in videos too. So here's some context. And you've been to New York City, I assume.
Yeah, I lived there for a little bit.
Yeah,
I had a business there.
So Jordan Neely was arrested 42 times. 3 of them were for assaults against women at or on the subway.
3 were assaults
against women.
Okay.
At or on the subway. Okay.
Yeah.
This was not like someone just having a bad day.
Yeah.
Okay. This was not someone just mouthing off and then someone being overreactive.
Yeah.
This was a guy who he had this background. He got on the train. He said, I don't care anymore. I don't care if I go to prison tonight for life. Someone's going to die today. And then someone else testified. He said, I will kill. And someone else testified, this one I'm not sure, but there was like a woman with a baby in a stroller, and he started advancing toward her. So when Daniel Penny jumped in, we talked about, I don't remember what the codes were, like white, orange, red. It was like a code red situation from a guy who had actually been violent before. And it's easy to abstract away. And I have people say stuff to me like, oh, well, there's homeless people all the time. Just ignore them. First of all, that shows how far we saw that we're like, oh, just ignore the violent, aggressive homeless person until they actually hit a baby. And if they hit a baby once, it's a wrap. Yeah. Right? Like there's no, you have to intervene before, otherwise they can die, literally. Yep. So it's like, how did we get into a situation where Daniel Penny is even necessary? Where a guy got arrested 43 times and he's not incarcerated and getting corrective care. Yeah.
How do we get there?
How do we get there? Well, we've decided to settle for this shit. We decided to settle for lawlessness. Oh, it's just New York. Yeah. No,
it's New York.
Yeah, it didn't always be this way. Like there was in the 90s, like Rudy Giuliani, who is now a pariah because he aligned himself with Trump. Yeah. But he was really popular because he cracked down on crime, and people appreciate that. So, did Daniel Penny go too far with putting him in a chokehold? I mean, he caused the guy's death. Right. Now, he did have a synthetic drug in his system, K2, which contributed to his death. So I don't know if he didn't have the drugs in his system, would he have died? It's hard to know.
He also probably wouldn't have done what he was doing if he didn't have K2 in his system. I've seen that. I've seen people with that in their system. They go cuckoo. Yeah. Right.
So it's like, but how do we create a situation where this is not necessary in the beginning at all, rather than say, oh, just put in your headphones and ignore them? Like, what is that? Yeah. So law and order sounds like this abstract thing until you see the consequence of not having law and order. And it's the same philosophy. This is my problem with some of these like far leftist views that are espoused in places. I mean, you see this in California too. Remember when I first moved to California, I was like, Venice is dope. This is great. Now it's a trash, bro. Yeah. It's trash.
It's gotten messed up.
Yeah. Like I remember 2 years ago, I was just sitting in, was it Hotchkiss Park, this park with the hill in Santa Monica. Yeah. Some homeless dudes start threatening to kill me, mouthing off for 10 minutes. And, I'm stubborn. So I just sat there. I was like, I came out here to meditate. Yeah. I'm going to sit here for 10 minutes. But he was going off and like literally threatening to kill me. Yeah. And I was like, where are the cops, bro? Like, it's like either I'm going to have to handle this, someone's going to have to step in and help me, or he's going to get to do this.
And this is the problem with lawlessness, is that it puts you in a good person in a position where they have to do something bad to protect themselves. And who's to say he said he's going to kill you? Like, is there a handbook on do I take this serious or not? Or is there like an app you pointed at him and like it scans his face and is like, oh, those mannerisms, he's joking.
Like, he's not about it.
Like, what are you going to do? And a guy told you, and by the way, it's illegal to look at somebody and say, I'm going to kill you. Yeah. That's assault without battery, I believe, or whatever it is. You're intimidating people. So he's already committed a crime. And if he's advancing towards you, like, what are you supposed to do? Mm-hmm. And I guess my point is, without lawlessness, to your point, those interactions happen, and good people have to do things that are considered bad for the greater good, either to protect themselves or protect the woman on the subway. Yeah. And we don't have to be in this mess if that guy's in jail or somewhere getting corrective care. Mm-hmm. And I just, it's once again, it's baffling how people can't see that.
Yeah. Well, it's because they're so, again, focused on the emotional thing. The emotional part. They allow themselves to be manipulated by politicians who are more fixated on the fact that Jordan Neely was black and saying things like, oh, if it had been a black guy who had done it to a white guy, then the black guy would have gone to prison. They're more fixated on the racial dynamics when, for all we can see, there was no explicit racial dynamic. Yeah. 2 black guys helped Daniel Penny. I mean, one of those like Latino and maybe half black. But men were intervening because it was a safety issue. That's what happened here. But instead, they're like, oh, well, this guy, he was a victim. It's like, he was a victim and he was a perpetrator. Yeah. Right? Like, he's responsible, and it sucks, but I'm like...
And it sucks.
It's horrible, and society did fail him by not protecting him from himself. Yeah. Right? 42 arrests. Why is he out on the streets?
Yeah. Somebody's going to get him, And that's why you tell your kids to act a certain way so they don't get beat up. But tell me, if you don't. Oh, by the way, is it true that did you hear this? And someone told me this, and I feel so. If this is true, I feel so ignorant for not doing my homework. And what happened to George Floyd? George Floyd was horrible. The outcry for equal treatment and lack of discrimination and biases and all that. There's something there, generally speaking, for sure. But someone told me that George Floyd knew the man that was part of like killing him, basically. Whoa. And that they had known each other in could have been high school. They were co-workers, and this is like I think I read it on Reuters or AP News, and it was an old article. Did you ever hear about that?
No.
Check that out for me, please. Because if that's true, I'm really upset. Not about anything but the fact that the media didn't cover it. And I brought it up because I was interested if you had heard about that.
Yeah. But well, there's a broader point about media coverage, right? And this is what people I think oftentimes don't see, and understandably so. Yeah. They'll selectively pick the facts that most align with the narrative that they're trying to push, which everyone does. But when people are assuming that the media is being as purely objective, we forget to be skeptical. Yeah. Like if some random person tells me something, there's an inherent level of skepticism that you have, but we haven't had that with media. So for example, with George Floyd, like I do know he had fentanyl in his system. Okay. Right? Like that contributed to his death too. Yeah. Right? And these facts are important to put forth because you could still believe that it was racism and cops need to be better trained or defunded, whatever. Yeah. But you need to understand the full nuance of the situation, not just the cherry pick thing that elicits the most emotional outrage. Yeah. And I think part of the problem here is that these media outlets, they're incentivized to just get clicks, especially in this online era of internet advertising. They're competing with
social media.
Yeah. They're competing, and they're businesses. They're trying to survive. But just be aware that they're businesses and they have an incentive as businesses to make money, not deliver the truth. Yeah. And
there's a lot of pressure on them because of social media.
Exactly. Yeah. So going back to this mass child rape case in the UK, or recently there was this in Germany during Christmas, like some Saudi Arabian dude ran a car through an audience of people celebrating Christmas.
I didn't catch that.
And what they reported, some of the headlines were, car drives through crowd on Christmas. It's like
there's no other context.
Yeah, that's some of the facts. But how about the fact that it was a Saudi Arabian immigrant who was here, who was on asylum from Saudi Arabia, who he had targeted a bunch of Christians.
Maybe we should be watching him if he was on asylum. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and for some reason he wasn't extradited, but like these facts matter. And part of the problem is like, oh well, we don't want to focus on his ethnicity or his religious ideology. These things matter.
Should we ignore it?
Yeah, we shouldn't ignore it. Yeah, we don't need to be racist. We don't need to cast broad generalizations, but we need to know what the truth is. Period. We got to trust people with the truth rather than coddling them with doses of it.
Yeah, I feel like that's what the part where I think there's an argument that we need to control speech, right? Because some people won't understand it. They can be led in the wrong direction. They don't know how to evaluate it. Therefore, we can't let them see this because they won't know how to handle it. So we have to protect them. I'm also very afraid of AI doing that to us, parenting us. That's actually my biggest fear with AI.
ChatGPT does it all the time.
Because like as a parent, if your daughter asks you why can't I don't know, they ask you should I start this business, and they're 9 and you think they shouldn't, you might be like, well, maybe you should start with a lemonade business or whatever, but you're parenting them and you're supposed to, right? You don't want to hurt their feelings, but I'm afraid AI is going to do that to us one day. And like I said, they're already doing it. But I feel like people thinking like America's so stupid they need to be parented is such a big problem. Anyway, I digress. I want to ask you about what's your feeling about religion?
I think we need more of it.
Tell me about it. And because I was interested, you started off in Catholic school, I think somewhat atheist, if I heard you right, and then back to your faith. And tell me why it's important. Why to you?
Yeah. So I think the root cause of all of this dysfunction that we're seeing is separation. Separation from God, from self, from nature, from each other, from family, from country. So it's all separation. Or you can call it disconnection. And even removing the idea of like whether you believe in God or not, like let's look at what is the utility of God? Well, one of the things that a belief of God, even without religion, does for you is it prevents you from being arrogant. because there's something above you.
Yeah.
There's some higher intelligence. You don't make up your own morals, you discover it.
Yeah.
And they're developed in the core fabric of the universe by this higher intelligence, God. One of the reasons why pride is considered the greatest of all sins, before envy or greed or lust or any of these things, is because pride leads to all the other sins. Because if you think there's no God above you, you can justify anything you want. Because our minds, they're just calculators. They'll calculate whatever answer we want.
Yep.
So it prevents hubris, a belief in God, even without the religion.
Just that one piece prevents hubris. Yeah.
Hubris, yeah. And there's a lot of hubris going on.
Yeah.
Right? Now, religion, it's time-tested cultural software for instructing us on how to live a life that we will best enjoy.
Yeah.
So again, we go back to the 10 Commandments. You could think of them as 10 suggestions if you want.
Yeah. Suggestions,
right? You know, like, I suggest that you don't kill.
Yeah.
I suggest that you don't lust after your neighbor's wife because you're probably going to have some beef. That's going to cross.
They might kill you.
Yeah, they might kill you.
Not, yeah.
Right? And even some of these ones that are a little bit more subtle, like, why take the Lord's name in vain? I don't think it's like, just don't say God damn it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, don't invoke God to justify your evil ends. Right? Because there's plenty of psychopaths who have, and this is part of the reason people don't trust the religious institutions. Yeah. There are psychopaths who do fucked up things in the name of God, and they call it God. Quote,
yeah.
unquote. That said, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because the core value of religion is it gives us an operating manual for life that's pretty damn good. It's pretty damn good at giving us some rules that we don't have to constantly question every time we make a decision, that if followed, will on average give us a better life. And this is proven out by the science, by the way.
I asked my dad about it recently, and don't please pick up at the science, but he was like, I was like, what's the whole point of the Bible? Forget the religion part. But like, what was the whole message? And he was like, oh, it's just understanding so you could live a better life. Yeah. He said that to me recently. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, it's certainly not meant to make your life worse.
Yeah.
It's like, follow these. We'll probably do pretty good. You know, it's like you get an instruction manual when you buy a product, and just like how you operate.
You can try it without it. If
you try to figure it out. You're probably gonna make a mistake, but you're free to try it. Yeah. And as you said with the cows analogy, you know, sometimes you just gotta try going beyond the boundary and see for yourself and get reality check. And you're like, now I understand why this rule exists. So this whole atheistic movement, what it's done is it doesn't give an alternative. A lot of the time, it's like, okay, you don't believe in God, but what's your alternative moral framework? Just be a good person. Well, who gets to make that up? What is a good person? Like, do you decide what a good person is? Even if we all agree on what good is, that's not what good is, right? Like, we've seen mob psychosis happen. That's what happened with Hitler. Like, many Germans went fucking crazy, and they did atrocious things. So you need objective truth that is divine. It goes beyond any human judgment, and it's not something you get to choose.
We need some of that.
You need that. So I don't think, you know, one of the things the founding fathers say is that the Constitution was designed for a Christian nation. It doesn't work without that. And what they meant was that there's certain things we can put in law, but you need morality, and you need a shared morality. Yeah. So when people say separation of church and state, they miss it, because the United States is a culturally Christian nation. Yeah. Does that mean that everyone here has to be Christian? No. But we do have Christian boundaries that even if you're Muslim or you're Sikh or you're Hindu, you still have to follow. Yeah. Right? Like, you're not allowed to have multiple wives here. Yeah. Right? We set the rule that just sets the fabric of a society. We can't cooperate if we don't follow certain rules. So I think we need religion. Yeah. I think we need more conscious relationship with religion, though. It shouldn't be just follow it without thinking. Yeah. Like, it's like, here's what's said, and here's why. Teach a 8-year-old. Okay, imagine if you did just start stealing whatever you wanted. What do you think the impact would be on your life? What do you think the repercussions would be? Help them reason to the logical conclusion, like, that's why this is good for me. I'm not being told what to do. I'm being invited into what would be good for me.
And being able, I think it's something there's something special about being able to also be a part of a community that feels the same way. Yes. It makes you feel more confident in your decisions about life. Can I ask you one more question, and then I gotta run to the restroom real quick? But sure. why do you see, in your opinion, why do you think there's such a war on masculinity?
Ah, love it. Favorite topic. One of my favorites. I actually tweeted about this today.
Yeah?
Yeah, it went viral too.
Here. Which one is it?
I think it's one I started with Trump won.
Right. Oh, okay. Trump won. Trudeau resigned.
Yep.
Keir Starmer got exposed. Bukele, how do you pronounce that?
Nayib Bukele.
Cut crime by 95% in El Salvador. Javier Milei created the first surplus since 2008 in Argentina. Masculinity is back. Great men are ascendant. And just in time, we are going to need them. Yeah.
Daddy's home.
Daddy's home. Amen. Yeah, what's the war in it, and why do we need it?
Yeah, man. When we talk about some of this stuff, I talked about my fundamental thesis on we have a disconnection and separation from God, from self, from each other, nature, and so on.
Yeah.
And there is such a thing as evil. I think everyone's fundamentally good. I believe that evil is a corruption of good. Evil doesn't exist without good. And even if you look at the Bible, like Lucifer is a fallen angel. Lucifer was good and then became corrupt. Right? So I don't think of evil as an inherent force. So the reason I say this is, if you're not on board with the idea of good and evil, just play with me for a second. In order for evil to thrive, what needs to happen? Good needs to be disempowered. Men's role is to provide law, order, structure, protection, provision, so that good can thrive. In order for the land of milk and honey to exist, we need to have safe barricades around the land of milk and honey.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, women can't be in their feminine. They can't thrive if the masculine structure and order is not there to protect it.
Yeah.
So if I were evil, what would I do? I would first attack masculinity, because masculinity has boundaries. Masculinity has resistance.
Yeah.
Feminine is not resistance. Feminine provides all these other beautiful benefits to humanity, is equally important as masculinity, but it does a different role. Yeah. So how do you attack masculinity? You start by saying masculinity is toxic. You start pointing out cases of bad men abusing their strength forcefully. Yeah. But then you project that upon all of masculinity, and you say, oh, see, masculinity, the first word that you think of when you think masculinity is toxic. We've now coupled
branded
things.
it, yeah.
You've branded it, right? So now you have little boys who say, well, I don't want to be a toxic man. So I'm going to reject masculinity. I'm going to feminize myself. And in fact, at the extreme, it has boys even wondering, am I even a boy? Maybe I'm actually a woman. Maybe I've been born in the wrong body. That's how deep this goes.
Yeah, because if you reject masculinity, what are you accepting? It has to be, yeah.
If you're rejecting masculinity, then you're rejecting a large part of being a man. Yeah. And, both men and women have masculine and feminine qualities, but men tend to be more masculine. That's just how it works. Men tend to be more equipped for roles that require masculinity. Yeah. Women are better equipped for roles that require more femininity. On average, there's exceptions, but they're exceptions. Yep. Exceptions actually prove the rule, not disprove it. Okay? So yeah, it's like when we look at leadership, like you want a strong masculine figure. Yep. It's usually going to be a man in charge, because what is the president? Chief in commander in chief, meaning they're responsible for violence. Yeah. Women don't have to think about, they have to think about safety, but we're men. Like, we know what it's like see another man, like there's a subtext of it could get violent at some point. You're not constantly thinking about it, but there's a point at which it could get violent.
I think all men, when you walk in a room, I feel like whether you like it or not, everybody's sizing each other up in some way, shape, or form, subliminally or not. And people miss that. And it's just like, I feel like laws and rules, I said it the other day, I was texting somebody, they said something to me, and they're like, oh, I didn't understand the man code. I said, I'm not happy about it. It's just how we survive each other. Yeah. That's how we survive each other. But go ahead. Sorry, but that.
And guess what? You can't have peace without strength. Yeah. Right? If you're weak, you get taken advantage of. That's just how nature works. The bottom line is going to be violence. Yeah. That's just how nature works. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just how this game is designed. Yeah. But if you demonize masculinity and you say masculinity is toxic, and in fact you go as far to say we don't need it. Women, just be independent. You don't need a man. You don't need a family. You know what? You should just go get your own job, be a boss, babe. Here, you can have an abortion if you have casual sex and you don't like the outcome. Yeah. And it's like, all of these structures support masculinity not being important at all.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like protector and providership, no. And I think women are suffering because it leads to crime.
Yep.
Right? Because guess what? Bad men, they don't care about this shit. They're just going to take what they want forcefully. And if you don't have good men who are powerful, forceful men who are evil will take what they want.
Exactly.
So you need strong, good men around.
To put them in check.
Yes, to keep them in check. But if you don't have any of that stuff, then anything's permissible. So, it's like, who stands to benefit from this? It's hard to know. People say stuff like global elites and all this stuff, and it's like it's hard to put a finger on who we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I like to just think of it as like there's a psychology of evil. And I think evil is generally just selfishness. It's like self-interest. It's like psychopathic self-interest that doesn't have regard for other human beings.
Yeah.
When we dehumanize other people, that's when we do evil things. No one ever thinks they're doing evil, right? They justify evil as good because they don't see the impact that they're having on other humans.
Yeah.
But when we erode masculinity, that is essentially the first and last defense against physical harm.
Yeah.
And is there toxic masculinity? Of course. I'm very glad the Me Too movement existed to call that out.
Yeah.
Women were not using their voices enough. Now women feel more comfortable using their voices.
That's a good thing.
But the solution to toxic masculinity is not losing masculinity. It's more of it.
Yes.
We need more masculinity.
It's actually more of,
Yeah. And in hunter-gatherer society, when we were in small groups of 20, 30, 50 people, men would keep other men in check. If one man is wilding, you all check him.
You're going to tap him on
counsel.
the shoulder and say, that's like, enough.
Okay, that's enough, right?
And you know what comes next.
But if you don't have that, who's going to keep him in check?
I say a lot like, man, I think there's toxic males, and I feel like masculinity is like, it's like, to me, it's a proper training of a man, and if you don't have somebody to teach him masculinity, it could be a book, it could be another man, definitely a role model should be involved. Like, you're still going to have a male, right? And what if that male hasn't been taught the core tenets of masculinity? And also, like, to me, when you get, like, boxing is great. You get taught violence, but you get taught how to tame it. That's what goes along with boxing, which is why when you introduce it at schools, less fights happen. Like, it just is what it is. And so, but I think same thing, like, along with being a man and being willing to be dangerous and being prepared to be dangerous, also being willing to protect in other ways that have nothing to do with physicality. Like, you're taught that you're a protector. You know what I mean? Not like there to harm people. And I feel like if you don't have that influence, that masculine influence, and the man doesn't buy fully into being feminine, you still have a man. You still have a male.
Yes.
And he's still going to have the same stuff pumping through his veins and the same feelings and of aggression and all these other things that can go along with it. And other people have it too, and women do it too. But you're still going to have to deal with him. So why not teach him how to be a man?
Exactly.
What's the anyway,
Yeah.
It drives me crazy.
It drives me crazy, and I think it's a big reason for so many problems. I mean, if you look at some of these national policies, like if a man's role is to protect and provide, that means a man has to provide boundaries and enforce them.
Yes.
In his personal life, in his community.
Yep.
What's happening at the national level? Oh, we don't have borders.
We don't have boundaries, borders. We don't have rules.
Just let anyone in. As a man, you would never let any random man, any physical male who's a stranger who's capable of violence into your home and just like leave the door open.
Into your yard.
Yeah.
The average person, you know what I mean?
That would be insane. It would be insane. Yeah. But when it's abstract, people, they don't realize the consequences, so they just start to justify this stuff. And ironically, the feminist movement has been leading to women being less feminine. Yeah. Because now, instead of women learning that men are positive and men are good and you should find a good man and you have a distribution of roles and you'll be equals but not equivalent. Yeah. You'll be equals but you do different things. Yeah. Instead, it's like, no, what I hear stuff all the time, like women saying like, oh, men are just dogs. Like the kind of stuff that I hear women saying about men. If a man called a woman, he'd be called a misogynist.
That's right.
So all of this stuff, like this, a lot of this trans stuff, a lot of this abortion stuff, it's like, I'm sympathetic to the idea that, for example, like a kid might be confused and they just want to they want to love themselves and feel accepted in their own body. And as a result, they think that, mutilating their genitals and sterilizing themselves is the right way to go. We can recognize where they're coming from without being permissive of the solution that they've introduced. Yeah. I feel the same way about abortion. I think it's tragic that so many women are not excited to bring children into the world. I think it's tragic that so many women feel like if they bring a child into the world, they're going to be abandoned by men, not supported, not have social services.
Tragic.
It's tragic.
It's also a lack of masculinity that created that. But go ahead.
Yeah, and lack of masculinity and lack of masculine support and men actually staying with their women is part of what was creating this. And at the same time, 95% of abortions are a choice. They're not due to rape or incest. 95% are elective, purely elective, not rape, not incest.
Oh, I didn't know that.
95 times out of 100.
That's a big number.
That's a big number. Yeah. Okay, that's
9.5 times out of 10. Yeah. 19 out of 20.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
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 So we can say like that a woman should have a choice over what's up in her body. And honestly, this is something I'm not sure because I used to be like, just like, pro-choice by default.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, it's just hard for me to see it as your choice, your body, because there's a body in you.
Yeah.
Right? That's a human fetus. And I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of what it looks like when they do an abortion. It's really hard to be like, oh, it's just a clump of cells.
Nah, I haven't, but we had 3 miscarriages before we had our daughter, and I remember that. And I wasn't there for all of it. One of them I was traveling, the most tragic one, the most horrible one. My wife had to see it, and it's like you become acutely aware of what we're doing here. You know what we're talking about. That was a life. You know. Yeah. And it is anyway. It is something. And but once again, and I feel like a lot of, and I struggle with the hypocrisy. I feel like a lot of people, they want to ignore that, but still be, not pro-choice, but like pro anything.
Yeah.
Pro anything goes, right? And I think, but they don't want to make exceptions for, I don't know, man. In general, and I was going to bring this up, I think some of my struggle with hypocrisy is like, I've met, since 1994, right? I grew up, my dad made we went from being in complete financial ruin, bankrupt as a family. I was like 6 or 7. And then by the time I was like maybe 18, he had made well over $150 million selling a grilling machine, right? Wow. And so when that money comes out of nowhere and your dad happens to be famous at the time, like he was the most recognizable figure on HBO. Like they call it the Q score, I think, above everybody. And so I bring that up to demonstrate that you get invited to these circles of people, and all of a sudden you just hear how, like, not all rich people talk, but certain rich people talk. And what bugged me about it is, and what you would call rich, liberal elite people, they'll I'm the type of guy, and I was raised like this. So one time my dad has this really big house, and big lot. He has his house, and then these gates around it. And then there's gates inside the gates. So you have to get through one gate, then you have to get through another gate, right? Like, security is important to us.
Yeah, of course.
And so we have a German Shepherd dogs, cameras everywhere. And this guy hops through over the gate, and he's trying to rob us, right? And my dad caught him. My dad happened to just be like walking the dog. And was like, hey, what's going on? He was like, and so we called the cops. And my dad said, hey, that fence is shorter. Get that one. And then go. He was trying to help him get away. He's empathizing. He's like, I see what situation you're in. You can't be here. We called the cops, but I'm trying to help you get out as quickly because I don't want you to go to jail, right? And the same thing is, like, if I see like an illegal immigrant and they're not dangerous, right? Or maybe they're a little bit dangerous. I'm not afraid of them in general. And they show up on my doorstep and they're hungry. I'm feeding them, right? And I'm going to be like, yo, you should go here. You should go here. I don't agree with the situation, how you got here, but that's a human. But I've witnessed people who they walk in, if that same person walked on their very lawn, like they would cry bloody murder, but they're the same person that thinks we should have open borders. So the reason I'm bringing this up, right, and I think you get the hypocrisy, they'll virtue signal, and I do this, and I give to that, and I support this, and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, well, feed them. Let them come hang out on your lawn, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that to say you shouldn't. I'm actually saying you should be empathetic with that person if they cross the border. I am. Why can't you? So my question is this hypocrisy, and I guess I want to, if you don't mind, transition a little bit into why you talk so much about communication. You talked about a term you used. You said courageous communication, but also, courageous communication. There was another term you used, though. It was like a cheat code of 3 things. What was it? Let's see. I had it here. It's in my notes. Courageous community. Let's just start there. But you had a list of 3 things that if you're trying to get your content to fly, it was like called something. What was it?
So yeah, I think of courageous communication as confidence plus empathy.
Let's just talk about it. Why is there why is communication so important to you? Why do you think there's such a problem? Why do people have such a communication issue?
Yeah. So this
because I think it allows a platform for hypocrisy, or I don't know.
Yeah. So if you're not allowed to speak freely, you can't think freely. You need to speak to understand how you think.
Yeah.
If you've never actually said your opinions out loud, you never actually reality check them.
Got it.
So you just have a bunch of ideas in your head, and you might even, I don't know, be like tweeting them or something, but you're still not actually bouncing them off of someone. There's no tension.
Yeah.
Right? There's no tension, and you need to test your ideas because you're gonna have a lot of bad ideas. Right?
Right.
You know, see how stupid your ideas are. You need to present them to reality. Yep. So that's why free speech is so important. But I think sometimes what's lost in the exercise of free speech is responsible speech as well.
Got it.
I think part of the reason that people are really resonating with my message is I'm not hostile. I obviously take strong stances, but I like to think that I've demonstrated that I understand opposite views. I understand the dilemma of someone who wants to get an elective abortion. I think it's important to demonstrate empathy, and I think the best way to demonstrate empathy is by showing that you actually understand someone's perspective, like the best version of their argument, while not...
That you take your time to understand the best version of their argument.
Exactly.
Got it. Without being intimidated that it might influence how you think.
Exactly. Okay. And also just be unattached to your opinions, because your opinions are not you.
Got it.
Right? Like... I've said stuff that I'm probably going to look back one day and be like, oh, I changed my mind. I disagree with that. And we're always all evolving. That's okay.
Yeah.
You asked me at the top, like, oh, well, why is it that people, even when you present with facts, they just resist it? It's because they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe to accept an alternative point of view.
Yeah.
Now, that's where the heart comes in. You know, courage, the word core, you know, like the C-O-R, courage comes from the root core, which means heart. So being courageous is speaking your heart. Mm-hmm. It's not here, it's here. Mm-hmm. And that's a very vulnerable experience. Like, hey, this is what I actually think. This is not even think. This is my actual knowing. This is what my heart wants to say.
Yeah.
And when you speak from that place, and you speak from a place of empathy, then it's a lot easier for people to feel like, okay, they're trying to build a bridge for me to come across to their view rather than bomb my view from their side of the ocean here. And I think the left is empathy without order and truth. Yeah. I think the right is often truth without empathy. Yeah. And neither work.
Yep.
Right? Both sides need each other. And in order for us to get where we're trying to go, is we need to recognize we need both sides. I don't think the truth is directly in the middle. I think it's somewhere in the middle often.
Yep.
And regardless, even if your side is in touch with the truth, you still need the other side to hold you accountable. Mm-hmm. So there is validity to the other side. It doesn't mean that they're truthful, but it means you need them.
Yeah.
It means
somebody's got to hold you accountable. Someone's got to challenge you.
Exactly.
So somebody you always kind of need to be maybe wrong, and they're going to check you.
Exactly.
It's healthy.
Yeah. And that's, you know, if we have humility, it's like, that's okay. Like, I get checked regularly.
Yeah.
It's like, I appreciate it when someone actually properly checks me. It's like, cool. Now I have a more correct view of the world, which serves me, it serves my message, it serves people who are being influenced by my message. Yep. It's just a good thing.
I'm so glad you said that, because a lot of my most contentious conversations with people, they don't realize I'm just trying to check myself. I am, and I guess maybe I'm not saying I'm right about everything, and I'm also not saying that's a great quality. I always try to check. I'm just saying that's what I'm trying to do, and I think it often comes off to people as though I'm trying to challenge them, but I actually want to know, are my views right? So I'm like, what about this? What about that? And they have a hard time with that. So a couple of lighter topics. What are these drones?
Bam.
If you were to guess, what are they? And why won't anyone tell us what they are?
Yeah. So I remember.
Are we that incompetent or what?
I think the government's lying. I think they know more than they let on.
Gotcha.
Here we're just gonna speculate for fun.
Yeah.
I've heard rumors from, hey, there's actually a nuclear weapon in the United States that they've been looking for. Although now that this has been going on for so long, it feels unlikely.
Yeah.
To, hey, this is actually, they literally don't know, and it's probably some sort of foreign adversary, but they're not saying that's a foreign adversary because they don't know who it is and they don't know how to deal with it, and they don't want to induce a panic.
Yeah.
You know, you heard about this Tesla Cybertruck.
Yeah.
dude,
that there might be a connection with that,
there
right?
might be a connection with that, and the guy who was allegedly in the vehicle, although we're not even sure if the guy who we thought was in the vehicle was in the vehicle.
Oh, because it burnt up.
Yeah, and they said he shot himself in the head, but if you look at the footage, it's pretty clear he did not shoot himself in the head. It like blew up at the same time as he was alive.
Wow.
Or that's at least how it appears. And he wrote a letter saying that, hey, the government is covering up this like UAP, basically UFO program, and the drones are connected to that, and they're not telling you the truth. And I'm doing this stunt to raise attention. Yeah. It's all very confusing. Yeah. And my concern is that I've always had this concern around aliens, that the government uses aliens as justification for taking our rights away or launching us into a war. It's like the whole WMDs are in Iraq thing. Got it. Over and over.
You got to make up something to justify X.
Yeah.
What we want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think all the government's onto it. I think I'm always suspicious of intelligence agencies in particular. I think they're lying. I think they know more than they let on. And I suspect they use it as justification for something. That's a more nefarious take. Or they're just so incompetent they have really no idea. I don't know which one is scary.
It's so funny. Why it's when some people might hear you say that and say, "Oh, he's a conspiracy theorist." And by the way, like most really good, well-run businesses that dominate IP and all that, they're constantly conspiring to maintain that position. So, like, why is this crazy to think that people who might touch business and politics might conspire? I don't know why that's so weird to think. Or like, oh, he's crazy and he believes da 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 da. But it's not far fetched. And if we go back to like, we're still trying to figure out who like shot John F. Kennedy, right? Yeah. And like, well, if that information is out there, which it seems like it is, that's been covered up. Is that not a conspiracy? And so I'm not like a whistleblowing, but I'm like, it's okay to say there might be conspiracies out there. Number two, for sure in the 50s and 60s, there was information that the government knew that they didn't share with everybody because they figured they don't know how to process it. It's top secret. We need that to compete with other countries, or we don't know what it is, or we long story short, we're not ready to deal with it, and neither are they. We're not going to let them know. I'm not saying they were right in doing that. I think it's been proven that the government's done that. So all of a sudden, if we say that the government's doing that now, we're crazy, right? Yeah. So that generally bothers me. My question for you on this whole situation is, you have Trump being assassinated. A lot of stuff you actually brought up, I saw on your channel. Trump to assassinate. Let's just stop. Let me. I'm going to come back to that. Let's just talk about that real quick. Yeah. There was 2 assassination attempts. One where a bullet flew right at his head and clipped the side of his ear, and it wasn't really covered by the media the way it should have. The way like Diddy was covered. Yeah. And then we kind of stopped trying to figure it out. How does that happen? If we're still curious about who killed Kennedy, and it's such a big deal that we're about to find out, someone just tried to kill Trump, a past president who's running for president, and we're not digging into it. What's that all about? What's your take on that? Yeah. If you were to just guess, and I think we're allowed to just guess. Yeah. Unless you know.
Yeah, if I knew.
And I'll go back to the whole thing.
World premiere. I think, first of all, there's just not an incentive to look. I think when you start looking at this not as Republicans versus Democrats or Trump versus Kamala or any of that, you start looking at this as an establishment. Some people call it the deep state, which sounds like a really, what does that mean? But I think just unelected bureaucrats who are not accountable to the people, who have been in these roles very long, and have been allowed to do whatever they want, and have been able to allowed to operate in secrecy. That's what I think of as a deep state. Yeah. And I think the intelligence agencies are the most powerful part of the deep state.
Powerful people who happen to know each other.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. And,
okay to say that.
You know, any organization, the incentive of the organization is to promote the health, the continued existence of the organization. Yeah. Like no organization wants to give power away. Yeah. So Trump, the thing that makes him so unique, I mean, he's the first person who's not a politician or a military guy to get elected president. Ever.
Very unique. I didn't even realize that.
Unique. He's not establishment.
Yeah.
So he's very threatening to the establishment. Yeah. So if his establishment politician almost gets assassinated, what's the incentive for the establishment to look into it? Gotcha. This guy's an enemy of them anyway.
Doesn't have to be a nefarious plot to kill him. It just says there's no incentive to go there.
We looked at the guy's phone. We're busy. Motive. Must just been a crazy guy. Whatever. There's just not a strong incentive to go that extra mile. Yeah. So you could believe something like they actually tried to do it themselves. Yeah. And I don't think that's out of I think with JFK, it's a lot of evidence seems to point to him, frankly. Yeah. But you also just believe that they They aren't incentivized to look very hard, so they didn't look very hard. And in fact, the Secret Service was so incompetent because the government's been incompetent, so the Secret Service has been a reflection of that this even got to this point in the first place.
So even if it's by virtue of just not wanting to be accused of incompetence, even if that's the reason, but it's just like, why would we dig into that? Number one, we got so much other stuff we want to do over here. Yeah. That one's going to point the finger back at us, the agencies that should have been protecting them. It's just not over-indexed.
Yeah, the head of Secret Service, she got fired. Yeah. Right? So, like, are you going to look into something that showed that you might have been incompetent and reveal that to the public?
No. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Unless I was a real patriot. But
very few people have the moral courage to do that.
Yeah.
So
maybe I would, but
yeah, I like to think I would do it, but it's incentives, they're really hard to override, man.
You got a family to look at.
You have this cushy government job.
Yeah.
So I think it's really disappointing that there was basically like a few news cycles worth of coverage and then they moved on. I don't even think Biden did a press conference.
The whole thing was bizarre.
And we just move on.
So when we look at that, right, then we look at the Cybertruck exploding a few hours, I think, after the thing in New Orleans. And then I just read today that from reputable press that maybe the local prosecutor or something like just murdered himself this morning, committed suicide. This just happened a few hours ago in New Orleans. So check that out. And then
what is all these suicides, man?
Dude, hold on. Let's just look it up real quick.
Trying to kill themselves.
I got you for a few more minutes. So let me just look this up. Hold on. New Orleans suicide. And then Tommy, can you look up George Floyd? Was George Floyd friends, or did he know the person that the cops that hurt him?
Derek Chauvin.
Yeah. It says Orleans Parish prosecutor dies by suicide in office. This is Fox, local Fox affiliate, WWL-TV, WDSC, Shop Central, Times Now, Mirror, all local press. Yeah, he killed himself. Orleans.
What?
Yeah. New Orleans.
Did you know he killed himself?
Yeah, well, that's what they're saying. New Orleans Parish assistant dies by apparent suicide in office. This just happened a few hours ago, or maybe yesterday. But so you look at all of this, and now I just want to have fun talking about it. So, could there be a connection? Like, it just all screams like fishy business. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that
it smells fishy. That's all. The whole thing smells fishy.
We're not even we're barely a week into the new year, and already all this stuff is happening. There's something there. It's just not a bunch of coincidences. And I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I think the more important thing to look at is, what does the government justify as a result of these things? That's always a scary thing, right? It's like 9/11, horrible, atrocious.
Yeah.
And people still speculate about whether it was an inside job or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't even need to get an answer for that to look at the fact that the justification for invading Iraq, like the thing that we did in response, invading Iraq, was one of the worst foreign policy disasters ever.
Yeah.
Right? Like, not only did we completely disrupt this country, right, and left it in shambles, it cost us trillions of dollars. Yeah. I don't even know, hundreds of thousands of lives, American and foreign lives.
A lot of innocent lives.
And what did we accomplish here? Like, you could say we took out Al-Qaeda. I think we probably just radicalized a whole bunch of new Al-Qaedas. We didn't find weapons of mass destruction. So the idea that this was like some government that we need to take out, not validated. And one could argue that destabilizing Iraq empowered Iran, who is on the verge of having nuclear weapons. So when we get emotional, that's when we get manipulated. When we are in a state of fear, that's when we get taken advantage of. Gotcha. And you can see that very obviously. Same thing with COVID. People speculate about, why are they vaccinating people? Is it a conspiracy theory? I don't know. What I do know is we reacted very heavily, and we started justifying things like taking away rights, right? Like, they tried to do this OSHA thing, right? And literally mandate that you have to get the vaccine, essentially, or otherwise you couldn't work.
Yeah.
And they almost did it. They almost successfully did it. Fortunately, we have a judicial system that countered that.
Yeah.
So we got to watch, it's not even like, sometimes people think, I think the thing that makes people think, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist is, I think conspiracy theory is a propaganda term. Yeah. Let's call them what they are, alternative hypotheses.
Yeah, that's it.
Right, that's all. Yeah. Just entertaining hypotheses, and we should entertain all of them to figure out what the truth actually is, rather than shutting down curiosity. But the second thing is, You don't even need to believe that there's fundamentally evil people in the world trying to pull the strings. I don't even think the majority of people who are complicit in these evil actions are actually trying to do something evil. I think sometimes it's just like benevolent elitism. Like they just think they know what's better for you. They just don't respect your ability to make decisions for yourself. And it's like, no, we're going to mandate it because you don't know what's good for you.
I think it's such an important point to make, because I think it's that's probably the best argument for some of the things that seem nefarious or whatever. But also, and then sometimes like humans at a high level make mistakes, and they got to clean it up.
Yep.
Because they got cousins, they got friends, they got a daughter. I try to imagine myself in that position, and I'm like, how can I clean this up with the least amount of collateral damage? Without hurting people, and then you get yourself in a pickle. That's something that can just happen. And I'm not saying I'm right about all these situations being cover-ups from unintentional actions. I'm just saying we have to consider it as an option. That's all. And it's just so hard for people to do that. All right. So what?
Wow, that's wild.
So, and what public? That's NPR.
At last year.
This is 2020.
Holy.
So I'm just trying to read it real quick. George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter in Floyd's death, worked together at Minneapolis club as recently as last year. This is 2020, according to a report. And so that's on NPR. Obviously, there's more to dig up here. And I read another article that said they may have known each other in high school, and it was kind of like they've never liked each other for years.
Wow.
And finally, they ran into each other in a moment where it was like, I'm going to show you. And someone that's their theory. But long story short, the fact that they just knew each other prior to that, and that NPR reported on it, and I think Reuters reported on it, I think AP reported on it, but it wasn't reported in the mainstream media, just really pisses me off. So I'll stop there, but just check that out when you have some time.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't even know what to make of that.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, it's wild.
So I think last thing, man, if you don't mind me asking, where do you think it's all headed? So I think we talked a lot about politics. We talked a lot about media, culture, free speech, etc. And I'll say one thing, and the reason, just to segue into our last point, free speech, I think same, just like laws, or just like what we saw happen with Trump, with him, all the felonies thrown at him for stuff that like we wouldn't hold anybody else accountable for, and so on and so forth. My thing with free speech is like some people feel like it's okay to, monitor, tell Facebook you can't put this up, or tell this, that has to come down. And it's been proven that the government was censoring social media, right? And so on and so forth. And my message to everybody who thinks that free speech should be modified or challenged or whatever, it's like, well, if you see what happens in other countries and where this could be headed, this could happen here, number one. But number two, if we create legislation around controlling free speech, and then we set a precedent that it's, there's a free speech problem because people are saying crazy things, let's legislate for that. We're setting a precedent to legislate against. I guess my point is, if the wrong person gets in charge, they can use that as a precedent to control you. And all I'm saying is, when I guess people who are far left liberal are like, we need to legislate for this to stop the conservatives from doing that. We need to do we need a law for it? The question, do we need a movement? Yes, for certain things. Do we need to change hearts and minds? Yes. Do we need media out there? Yes. Do we need nonprofits out there? Yes. Do we need to sometime attack people and get them out of their position of power if they're wrong? Absolutely. But do we need a law for it? And all I'm saying here, broadly speaking, could you talk a little bit about, the difference in things that need legislation versus things that just need cultural influence,
Yeah, we are overusing legal solutions to cultural and spiritual problems.
There it is. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's what we're doing.
You're so good.
And, there's certain places where we need laws to prevent physical violence toward another person, for example, right? That's just like, it's simple. It's cut and dry.
Yeah.
Many of the cases where we're trying to apply laws, the second order consequences are worse than the problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
So it's like the cure is worse than the wound. And when we do that, like, not only does it put us in a situation where we have so many laws restricting our freedom that it no longer even becomes America, it no longer becomes a place that we want to live, we make it very hard to actually get out of that scenario without actually very extreme measures. So we need to be very careful. I mean, one of the problems that's happened, not just in free speech, but in business, one of the things that Wall Street is very excited about is all the deregulation is going to happen. People hear deregulation and they become concerned. Like, what do you mean? Like, we have all these laws protecting us from corporate greed and all these other things. Yeah, but what you're also doing is you're stifling growth and you're stifling actual growth-based solutions to problems.
Yeah.
Laws don't create growth.
No.
Right? They restrict growth, pretty much by definition. So every time we create a restriction, we have to recognize that there's some door that we're closing. And if we close every door, eventually we're going to be trapped. Free speech is one of those doors that we should be very, very careful to close. Now, we don't have absolute free speech. There's certain things you're not allowed to say, like you can't say, go kill this person. But there's very, very few, and we're very careful with them. And they're actually not in the Constitution. It's made by the Supreme Court even. So rather than looking for legal solutions to cultural problems, let's see what the cultural solution is. If the problem is people are engaging in hate speech, it's because they have hateful views. How do we help address hateful views? You don't address hateful views with more hate. Yeah. You address it with love and understanding and helping them understand, okay, look, you're upset that, immigrants are coming into the country and that they're brown-skinned. Okay, why are you upset? What is it that you feel like your needs are not getting met? Okay, how can we help you get your needs met? Have you tried other ways of exercising your voice so that you can get your needs met? Yeah. So oftentimes people just don't feel understood, and that's when they become hateful. Okay. And the best solution to that is not to counter fire with fire. You counter fire with water. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to do. We need to start throwing water over this situation. Yeah. And that water is just as strong as fire. It's just a different element. Mm-hmm. Right? And we need to be more comfortable using that other element. And that can be hard when someone's coming at you with a blowtorch. Yeah. And yet it's still not what we need to do.
So last question, man, and I kind of we were talking about this when you first got in, was how media. I was talking about it. I have this feeling, and it's why like we created the studio and so on and so forth, that I just feel like there was a time where culture influenced media for the most part, right? This is just an opinion or a hypothesis or like my theory, right? I don't really have facts to prove this. I hope they're out there. But culturally, what people were feeling in their neighborhoods or communities or region, et cetera, would influence what was on TV. And of course, there was spin, and of course, there's always agenda by anyone who owns these networks. But there was influence from the ground up that would get disseminated back down through TV shows, comedy, whatever, movies, the news, or whatever. And I just, let's just say it was 60-40, 60% culture driving media, and then the other 40% was whoever owned it with their agenda or with their whatever. Something like that. I just felt like it was more culture than, but now I feel like media is driving culture the other way around. And I think part of it, I'm just getting this feeling because somebody can sit at home with their camera, and we're doing it, and so on and so forth, but they can become a big TV star, a big YouTube star or a big music star, and set trends on how they how they dress, their political views, their cultural views, their views on women, men, like the guy from the UK. What's his name? Andrew Tate, right?
Looks like he's running for UK Prime Minister, by the way.
Really? Oh, God.
That's the timeline we're in.
There you go. Yeah. So this guy, without being in every city and state, his content is, and he's influencing young men that are like 13 to 17 in a powerful way. Mm-hmm. This media influencing culture without having, and what the last analogy I'll make for anyone listening is that, like, there was a time if you wanted to become a great music star, for the most part, you had to be cool in your high school. Your family had to think you could sing, at least. Then your high school, right? Then your local town, then your community. Then your community, then your town, then your city, then your region. Maybe you get on radio, and then somebody says, we're going to sign you to a major record deal and make you an international superstar. Generally speaking, that's how it used to be, right? If you're going to get someone to put anything behind you. And so there were so many barriers that would have to strain out the riffraff, strain out the untalented people, because you got to make it past your hood, basically, to get to where you're going, right? Your neighborhood. Now those don't exist. And now somebody, once again, if it can catch the algorithm, if it can catch people sharing it and so on and so forth, media can influence culture without and the messages, I'll use Andrew Tate for an example, or anybody, the messages that they're putting, they're not being strained by the local community. They're not being filtered by the region. They're not being filtered. They're just going wherever they want, right? Without having to be considered popular or tested. And so that can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? My question for you is, Do you see any of that? What's your opinion of it? Because I just feel like people are walking around with ideas in their local neighborhood in Wisconsin that don't come from their local neighborhood or their local state. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Do you think this is going on? What do you think the future is of media and how important it is in culture?
I think it's generally a good thing because it restores individual agency and freedom. Because in the old model, if you think of this, let's say you're a musician, you got to get on local radio, then you got to get on state radio, then you get on national radio.
Gatekeeping.
Yeah, well, who's a gatekeeper? And are their intentions pure? And you hear all this stuff in Hollywood and the music industry of all this dirty stuff that they force people to do, like women to do sexual favors or people to bribe people. It's just who you know. So it gets really gross. That's a problem with power when you have gatekeeper and permission systems. I think having a more permissionless system is generally good, but what comes with that is more freedom means more responsibility. And that's one of the most important things for the era that we're heading into.
Responsibility.
People talk about freedom. People want more freedom. Yeah, and freedom is great, but freedom without responsibility is chaos. It's just chaos. And the substitute that we've used for individual responsibility is the state. But now we're seeing the downsides of relying on the state, especially when the state is not transparent. So now that trust in that is eroding, we don't have like a trusted information source that you just go to one and make up your own mind. It requires individual responsibility again and your own discernment. And one of my concerns, like I think it's generally a good trend, but one of my concerns is that it's so online. And when people are all online, they are disconnected from their senses. So they literally can't, they're disconnected from their bodies. They can't tell what's true anymore in their daily existence. We're saying men are women and women are men. It's like, you just look for your eyes. Like, we used to not have to debate this stuff because we're in touch with our physical senses. So I think what we can do from more top-down perspective is we need to fix education. We need to make education actually education. Teach people to think for themselves, to reason for themselves, to sense their way through the world, help people heal their trauma so they can be in touch with the truth. Because when people are traumatized, it's hard to process the truth. Right? If you're processing everything through trauma, you're not safe and you're just acting from fear. So people got to heal. People got to get educated. And when people are healed and educated, freedom's amazing. Because now we actually are equipped to be personally responsible. We're not emotionally reactive. And if someone makes some wild statement, they don't get engagement just because they made the most outlandish statement. We actually give our energy and our attention to people who are adding something positive. And not this like mundane, Pollyannish, banal positivity, like real, like they're adding something constructive. That's
constructive, positive, forward.
So, one of my concerns is that with these social media algorithms, they're optimized purely for engagement, just what gets the most clicks. So, I have mixed views on Andrew Tate. I actually really like him. And I also see how there's like negative externalities of the way that he speaks, but I also get why he's speaking that way intentionally, because he's an equal and opposite reaction to lunacy on the other side. And I think he needed to act the way that he did in order for young men to hear him. I think the majority of these young men, they just want to have a better life for themselves. They want to have a nice car, a nice wife, a nice house, and have a good life. And are there going to be people who feel like assholes who feel emboldened to be assholes? Yeah. And we always got to deal with that. But we don't want to remove people like that. We want to equip the people who are receiving the message to pass it through their own filter rather than blindly follow anyone. Shouldn't blindly follow the news, like legacy media. We shouldn't blindly follow influencers. People shouldn't blindly follow myself. I want people to think for themselves.
Period. I think my hope is I feel like voices like yours need to be amplified. And I'm just wondering I guess in closing, what is the answer to making sure that the right media is getting to where it needs to go, right? Because we just talked about the algorithm and so on and so forth. How do we amplify? What's the answer? Because if we're overwhelmed with the wrong voices, we already know where this is headed because we've just seen it for the past few years. How do we flip that? Just any ideas?
I mean, look, I started speaking about this stuff 6 months ago with a pretty small platform. Like, I had a few thousand followers on my Instagram, and that's about it. And now it's blown up exponentially. And I like to think it came because I was speaking the truth and I was doing it kindly. So I like to think it kind of took care of itself. And it requires people of clear minds and full hearts to just have the courage to say what needs to be said. And I think up until this point, many decent people haven't spoken up because it's felt scary too.
That's right.
And now the stakes are too high for us to be quiet. So we all need to start speaking up. And I think if everyone's speaking up, the truth eventually wins. But if only some people are speaking up, then lies can win. So that's it. And that's why I'm glad that my message is resonating. And also, like, shout out to Elon, right? Because Elon's been a huge part of helping my message get out there. And he's demonstrated a lot of courage and put his own personal reputation on the line to just get common sense out there. So I think common sense and truth take care of themselves, but only if they're actually out there. So we need people to be leaders.
People need to speak up.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Elon, I think he said, I don't want to misquote him, but I believe he said this guy's a clear thinker.
He did.
And he was right, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, bro. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.